Okay. Is Jay? Are you back?
Yeah, man, I'm here.
Okay, so since you've been on the show, I'll let you introduce yourself second. Mark, why don't you introduce yourself to the audience?
Oh, yeah, sure. I'm a writer, thinker, and researcher in the alt-right, I guess. And I'm coming out with a couple of books on what I call racial esoteric moralization. So it's about racial subtexts in art and parable, both ancient and contemporary. Yeah, I mean, that's, and I also, I'm on, I will co-host with Richard Spencer on his show pretty regularly. So.
All right, Jay, again, you've been here before, but it's been a while. I think it's been almost a year since you've been on the Kill Stream.
Yeah, that sounds about right. I think the last one I was on was Dick Masterson, Keemstar, and all that money that got wasted.
Yes, I do recall that. But it's been a while. It's good to have you back, man. Why don't you introduce yourself to the audience as well?
Yeah, I do jaysanalysis.com and the YouTube channel Jay Dyer. I'm the creator of the TV show Hollywood Decoded, co-host of that. I'm also an author. I have 2 books on Hollywood and symbols in film. And I do a lot of live streams that talk about philosophy and theology. I do a lot of debates, and I do a lot of satire and comedy.
All right, so I guess that was the introductions. I'll go ahead and let you give your opening statement. I don't really know where this is going to go exactly. You guys are the experts on religion, not me. But if you see me do these sorts of things before, I kind of just sit back and mostly let the debate, blood sports, whatever you want to call it, participants kind of do their own thing, and only interject if audience member has a question there in the Lino chat, or if I have a little short question or whatever. So it's mostly going to be you guys driving the conversation. But Jay, I'll let you go ahead with your opening statement. Those were the introductions. I'll consider those separate. So go ahead with your opening shot here, and then I'll let Mark get in.
Well, we both exchanged essays, so I'm fine if whoever goes first. It doesn't matter to me. If you want me to go, does Mark care who goes first?
No, I don't care. I mean, I think probably maybe just defining what we're talking about, right? I think it was somewhat clear in our exchange. But essentially,
Are you there, Mark?
Yeah, I'm there. I'm just looking at my the text that we exchanged.
Okay.
Yeah, no, so I think that we were going to talk about my argument. Well, I guess I effectively I can start with my argument, and you can address it. But my argument is that Christianity is a very essentially kind of Jewish phenomena, and that it is developed kind of intelligently in an antagonistic way toward other people, non-Jews, and especially whites, right? Because it was especially sort of adapted toward Europeans, I argue. So Christianity, however it's sort of kind of existed with whites or Aryans, maybe if occasionally also operating in a sort of incidentally salubrious manner, was developed as a kind of antagonistic religion, as a way of basically sort of dominating the Aryan or European group. So essentially, it's an antagonistic religion. The other thing that I would argue as well is I think that we also were going to talk about, I mean, I guess there's 2 levels that we could approach. And one I could kind of like, I'm not that really worried about. I mean, we had talked briefly on Twitter, and you had said that you believed the sort of the parables that appear in, the Old Testament and the New Testament, and maybe I'm not quoting you correctly, to be both historical and allegorical, which I'm just interested to learn what that means. But what my argument is that certainly that they're allegorical, that it is a fictional work. Both the Old Testament and New Testament are fictional works. Is someone typing? Oh, I can hear it though, so it's a little distracting. All right. So anyways.
All right. Well, can I address one point right away?
Sure.
First thing I would say is that to be precise, there are multiple types of literature that are in the biblical canon or scripture. So sometimes there's a parable which is meant to be strictly a parable, and I would agree with you that sometimes it's allegorical and has no historic context, but then sometimes historical events also have a later fulfillment, a later meaning in the future, which is also symbolic. So it just kind of depends on the context and what specific example there is. So for example, if we look at Galatians 4, there's a situation where Paul gives us an allegory. And in that allegory, he talks about how the symbolism behind Hagar and Sarah represents two types of women. One woman is the church that he talks about as the New Testament fulfillment of the type of Old Testament Israel. And he says that this allegory is based on the story that is historical, Paul is arguing, in Genesis, if we start from 12 to 15 to 17 to 22. Those are the four main chapters where Abraham is given a covenant and a covenant promise. And it's interesting because Abraham is called as a Gentile. So he's not a Semitic, quote unquote, person in the sense of the way a lot of the characterizations of post-Talmudic ideology, that I think Mark comes from in his vantage point, tries to sort of portray the Old Testament as this uniquely Semitic, quote unquote, thing. I mean, Shem goes all the way back to Noah's descendants in terms of the Genesis account. Anyway, long story short, all that just to say that sometimes an event like Hagar and Sarah in the Old Testament is both historical and an allegorical presentation about the fulfillment of the New Testament, which is the opening of that same covenant all the way from the time of Adam to Noah to Moses up through Christ. We see a continuity in this covenant relationship, and it begins with a couple people, then it moves to becoming a family at the time of Noah, then it moves into becoming a tribe with Abraham. It then expands to a nation when it comes to the period of Israel and Moses at Mount Sinai. You have a sort of a little divergence there with the Davidic covenant, which is a kingly covenant. And then we believe that all of those covenants signify and are types, as in typology, the events that Christ then fulfills. He comes as the Messiah, and he is the prophet, priest, and king, this role that had been predicted for so many centuries. And then he establishes his church, which we see as the spiritual fulfillment of Israel in the Old Testament.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, my position would be that it's largely parabolic or allegorical, as you would say. I don't disagree that Abraham is intended as a Gentile character or an Aryan character. I think that that's actually a correct reading. But I think that including the New Testament, that what we're looking at is a largely parabolic work. And we can, people have argued about the historicity of the New Testament. Often, again, the challenge is finding pagan corroborators of it. The famous one is Tacitus, of course. That discussion is not really, I actually don't, I think that discussion is kind of a black hole, and it's not really that interesting. I think that actually that it's shown to be parable just by the events. I mean, first of all, some of the events are clearly fictional events. The other events are clearly drawn from other pre-existing, pagan myths, which it's evident that Christianity is modeled on. Those cults being the cult of Adonis, the cult of Bacchus, and cults really going all the way back to Dumazed in Sumer. How
is it you've come to this conclusion? How do you know this? How do you know it's not the other way around?
Well, first of all, so let's. Because these cults pre-existed Christianity. Right?
According to who?
Well,
Well, you mean pre-existed Christianity, yeah, but we believe that we're in perfect continuity with the covenants of the Old Testament. That's what I just argued.
Yeah, no. So these pagan cults pre-existed Christianity. So that would be the argument, and it's actually not my view that Jews just sort of bowdlerized these pre-existing cults. I think that Jews are actually very intelligent, and that I estimate that Jews probably existed as another group before becoming Jews. As what I call proto-Jews, and they've existed since Sumer. And the reason is because in these cults, you see a kind of intelligent and repeated use of symbolism where meaning is retained through symbols. and the same sort of meaning is assigned to symbols, and you see the same pattern all the way through the New Testament. So in my mind, it's clearly Christianity is clearly an invented parable.
Okay, so first, again, what I'm trying to stress, though, is that I understand from your perspective, from what I read in your Apolloism 3.0 essay, and from what you're saying, that you believe that the Old Testament period is kind of a combined bunch of mythology, and that Jews were kind of creating a mythological. I understand that you're saying that, but our position is different. So we're actually arguing for a continuity there. And so from our position, we would actually say that no, Christianity is not a new invention religion that comes along at the time of Jesus. We actually believe that it's, again, in perfect continuity with all of these series of events in the Old Testament. For example, that's why there's so many messianic prophecies that Christ fulfills. Now, I know that you don't accept those. I'm just saying that I'm arguing for a specific position. So if you're going to argue against a position that I don't hold, it's not really relevant to the debate. I mean, for example, you said Abraham is an Aryan type of character. Do you mean that the Jews invented Abraham from Aryan myths? I mean, I think it's kind of...
No, I'm not saying that. And I'm using the term Aryan as a racial term, right? So I'm not using it as a reference to...
Do you think Abraham was an Aryan?
He was a white guy, effectively. He was a kind of proto-European or proto-Aryan.
And you, how did you come to this conclusion?
Well, I came to there's a lot of sort of clues that point to it. One of the clues, which is a kind of very striking parable in Genesis, where Jacob is basically defrauding Laban, right, of his sheep. And the way that he does this is, I'm sure you're familiar with the story.
Yeah.
Laban, and all one of the reasons that we know all these characters are basically invented characters is because the names are very meaningful, and the names are assigned in a kind of very meaningful way. So they represent kind of invented characters, like characters you would encounter in a comic book, for example. An artist is creating characters, and he's giving the names meanings. And so you understand immediately that you're looking at kind of the invention of an artist. Okay. And one example of this is the character of Laban, whose name means white, right? Mm-hmm. And he has a white flock of sheep. His daughter is named Rachel, and her name also means baby sheep. And Jacob strikes a deal with Laban, and he basically says, hey, you know what? Give me all this sort of dark or spotted or black sheep in your flock. And because those are not desirable sheep, Laban agrees to the deal. And so what happens is in order to effectively make these sheep dark, what he does is he takes these branches and he strips the branches so the branches are both black and white, right? And through that, he kind of encourages this sort of mixed breeding, it would seem, among the sheep so that they end up being black or speckled. That's how Jacob steals the flock of Laban, as it were. Right, so we kind of see an early Jacob effectively represents in my mind a kind of proto-Jew, and because Judah, the tribe of Judah, ends up being the Jewish tribe. But effectively, what we see is a kind of proto-Jew, creating media, as it were, to introduce a kind of a dysgenic or mixed breeding among a kind of Aryan or white group, right? Among a white flock.
Wait. Real quick,
you're saying that's the meaning of the story with the sheep is the interbreeding of races?
Yeah.
All right, hold on one second. Hold on one second, Mark. I don't know what's up with your mic, but if you could, I see people complain about it. I can hear it too, like it's rubbing against your shirt or something. So if you kind of maybe isolate that, that'd be good. Now go ahead if you want to respond.
Okay. So
no. I mean, there's actually no sort of kind of intelligent way to decode that riddle or that
there's plenty of intelligent ways to decode.
All right,
that.
So what's your interpretation?
So first of all, let me make a point about the names. So why do you think that? Well, having a name that's significant, which was common in the ancient world, in no way leads to the conclusion that they're not historical people per se. Now, that was your first argument, was that we know that these aren't historical people because they have names that are significant, therefore they're literary devices. Now, I'm not saying that to be rude, but I mean, I did advanced literature courses. I know that what you're talking about, if you take lit theory, yes, you'll study, Flannery O'Connor, and you read about how names are significant. And it's funny. And there's no doubt that in the ancient world, the Bible is using those kinds of names in a significant way, but that in no way does that equate to them being ahistorical or not historical. So that's an assumption that you have right away that I don't think you'd question. And then secondly, the fact that you have a racial paradigm that you understand does not, that you can read into these texts, does not prove that that's the meaning of those texts. So I think that you're doing a lot of eisegesis, which is where, not exegesis, where we exegete the text and we derive the meaning from the text, but where we read into the text the meanings that we presuppose. And I think that the very, very fanciful reading of that story that you just did is quite ludicrous, honestly.
All right. Well, so 2 points. The first point would be the names. There's a pattern, right? So I've studied Jewish art for a very long period of time. I've studied Jewish cinema. I've studied Jewish comic books in a very kind of careful way. And what emerges is that there's a very close attention paid to names. This is just kind of a trend throughout Jewish art. Now, it's not necessarily the case in every piece of Jewish art, but it's a kind of salient trend that exists in Jewish art, which I call Jewish esoteric moralization. And Jewish art is told consistently from an ethnic or racial perspective. This is also the case, of course, in the Old Testament, which is very obvious just based on the kind of more explicit conflicts or tribal conflicts that Israel or the tribe of Judah has with their adversaries. I mean, that's something that you would admit. I would assume you would admit that the work is a kind of highly ethnocentric work. The Hebrew Bible, I mean, this is something that people just kind of acknowledge and is very obvious, right? So, well, let me finish my point because you made 2 points. And then the other thing I would say, names are significant, and that's just something, and it's not just Laban, it's names throughout the Hebrew Bible that are significant. It's names that are in the New Testament that are significant as well. I mean, you mentioned a typography that is important, or typology rather, that is important to Orthodox Christians.
Right.
And I would say that to one extent or another, that's also a kind of nomenclature-based typology.
Sure.
And that's something that I've tracked in my work, right? So in other words, we see similarities between Joshua and Jesus, for example, right? Or we see similarities between the biblical Joseph and the New Testament Joseph.
Yeshua is Jesus' name, correct?
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. So, and because of this, we know that they're invented parabolic characters that are based on earlier characters. Yeah, well, I mean, that would be the sort of sort of logical conclusion that people would generally make.
No, it would not.
I think you made another. You made another point. You said that my reading of that parable was ludicrous. But my reading of that parable is actually kind of the most likely explanation for that parable, assuming that parable actually has meaning. I'd be interested to understand your reading of that parable. So, Jay, how do you interpret that?
So, first of all, I admitted that names are significant, and that what I said was that it doesn't logically follow that they're parables. And that was your argument. You restated that they're parabolic on the basis of names being significant. I said that's one of the reasons. That's one of the reasons that we know they're parabolical.
But
it's a non sequitur.
One of the clues. That's one of the clues that we know that they're parabolical.
Yeah, only if you operate on your presuppositions that you think that these are all stories. But that's the thing.
So, Jay, what is your interpretation of that parable?
Well, I think that if you read somebody like James Jordan, he has a whole commentary on this. He has a really good analysis of not just Genesis, but also the symbolism behind these people. But when it comes to Jacob, you are correct.
Is he a Christian? Is he a Christian, the person you're referencing right now?
He is, sure.
So he's a Christian propagandist, effectively. All right, continue with what you
I mean, if you want to say that everybody who holds a view is a propagandist for their view, then yes, in that sense, we all are. I am, you are. But what I'm saying is that if you want to get bogged down in symbolism and typology, that's fine to do that. I don't have a problem talking about what Jacob's trying to do. But let me give an example from differing, like, for example, there are occultists, right, who will go to this story and they'll say, you still haven't given me an explanation for that parable. You haven't given me an explanation for that parable. That we can't read into it our presuppositions. And I'm giving an example from people.
I would be interested to know what the other explanation.
Hold on, from people who will read this parable and they'll say, well, this is Jacob using an occult method where he is putting the branches in front of the sheep to get them to do something that would then lead to them being streaked and speckled and stuff, right? So, in other words, what I'm saying is that when you read this, you read it as a racial narrative.
Yeah, but that's a sort of less likely explanation. And
when
that
an occultist reads it,
listen,
no, the typical higher critics who read this, they'll say that he had an occult worldview, a superstitious worldview, where he thought that these branches in front of the eyes of the sheep would cause them to be born speckled and spotted. But that has nothing to do with races being mixed. I mean, where in the story you get races being mixed?
It's a white flock. What do you think the significance of a white flock is? Do you think it has any significance at all, or do you think that was a kind of arbitrary
detail? Do you think that when the word? Do you think that at that time that they understood Aryan people to be white people? This is so
I
ridiculous.
think through every period of history, people could tell the difference between a white and a black.
You think that the ancient world, that when this was written, I know that you don't accept Mosaic authorship, but you think that at this time, this story was written in ancient, pre-Mosaic time to picture white people, or not?
Well, yeah, it was written, 800 BC or later?
I don't believe
right?
it, but I'm sure
I mean,
as a higher critic, you believe that.
Yeah, I don't think it's that early. So
this was written in 800 BC,
and then one of the reasons that we know
as an apologetic treatise against white people, a secret Gnostic a treatise against Aryan white people. Did they live in the Semitic regions?
Well, look, first of all, Jews have always existed among white people. They're a kind of urban people that are adapted to urban environments.
Yeah, but you're trying to demonstrate that this story is about that.
Well, I think it's evident from the details of the story that it is actually, in fact, about that.
It's not evident. You're the first person I've ever heard say this.
Well, I'm the first one to.
Nobody's ever come to this conclusion.
I'm the first one to have decoded it, frankly. Right.
Oh, well, that's where we're coming to the root of this, is that this is your presuppositions and the religion.
Well, it's actually just the kind of most logical. Like, if you're an artist trying to
it's only the most logical on your presuppositions, which you've not demonstrated. You're reading it into it, right?
So, what is your reading? What is your reading? It's a white flock that he turns black and speckled by showing. I take the story.
I take the story as it is. He had a means by which he had the know-how to get a hold of that flock from Laban, and Laban had already deceived him, actually.
Yeah, but that's not actually explaining the details that I've just kind of explicated. That's you've actually just avoided. What is the significance of the striped branches?
I don't have a problem with Genesis and these works actually meaning what they say in history, because I come from a different paradigm as you.
Well, I don't come from stated what it's parable, so it's open. Ostensibly, it's open for interpretation. But I actually
haven't demonstrated that this is a parable. First of all, you're assuming that it's a parable. I admitted to you that there's different types of literature in Scripture. Sometimes it's historical, and sometimes a narrative. Sometimes it's presented as a parable, right? So, like when Isaiah lists, comparisons to stellar phenomena, sometimes he's talking in parables.
Well, do you believe it to be a parable?
No, I do not believe this is a parable. I've told you that multiple times now. Now, does that mean that
do you believe the story of Adam?
Did you not listen?
Yes,
Adam is a historical person. The first thing I told you was
Adam is a historical person, right?
That's my belief, yes.
So an actual snake was deceiving Eve in the Garden of Eden. You believe that to actually be the case?
No, our view is that before the fall, the metaphysics of the world operated in a different way, which ironically, even you as a pagan, you're not a pagan. Whatever your view is, you like to look back to the primeval time of the gods, right? I actually kind of think that in our theological perspective, they're kind of hearkening back to the collective idea of what Eden was. We don't exactly know the metaphysics of the way Eden worked before the fall, before man was banished from the Garden of Eden. But after the fall, things changed significantly. So I don't believe that a literal snake was crawling around and talking to Adam and Eve in the sense of the way that we understand a snake now. We believe that was an angelic entity, namely Satan.
But so what you did, you would accept that it's a kind of intelligently designed parable to convey a moral.
No, I'm saying that it was an actual metaphysical reality, but the world was different before the fall. So this is a big difference between the way the world operates now after Adam and Eve fell and the way it was in Eden.
Well, so how was this information transferred to man? Like, how were people able to write this down in Hebrew? If there was, there was a kind of theoretical period before the existence of man that you're describing, that it was kind of mystical in nature. How was this information transferred to man?
Well, we believe that there was a direct revelation to Adam and Eve from God. They had a direct communion with God, and then when they were banished from Eden, when there was the fall, if you read in Genesis, it talks about the cherubim having the sword, and they're kind of banished and kicked out of that spiritual dimension. In our view, there was a radical change in the whole cosmos. It wasn't just like a legal category that Protestants think about. Well, we sinned, and then now we're God's angry at us or something like that. It was actually a gigantic metaphysical shift. And if you read Romans 8, Paul goes into this pretty extensively when he talks about the whole creation being subjected to the results of Adam's fall. So, I'm answering your question. So basically what I'm saying is that when Adam and Eve are then banished from the garden, God begins the process of the promise of restoration, and he tells the punishment for Adam, he tells the punishment for the serpent and for Eve, right? And one of the things he says to Eve is that the seed of the woman will crush the head of the serpent. So that there is then a beginning of the restoration of mankind at both Adam and Eve, to reunion and relationship with God, which is the beginning of the messianic promise. So God still has a relationship and a communion with Adam and Eve, but death has been introduced. And so for the many centuries of the Old Testament, you're right, it's an oral transmission of this story. And at times, we would say God does interact and have a relationship, covenantal actions, right? So for example, from the time of Adam, we move up to Noah, right? Noah is the next significant covenantal action where God interacts with and makes promises to his people, and the promise to Noah is also of this future coming Messiah. So again, as I pointed out from the beginning, we believe that there's a continuity in these covenantal actions and relationships throughout the Old Testament that are summed up in the arrival of the person of Christ.
What do you believe? What do you think about the earlier, or presumably earlier existing myths that sort of predate and are very similar to the myths appearing in the Hebrew Bible? What is the kind of orthodox position or explanation for that? Yeah,
there's I'm not citing this as proof, but if you look at something like the Tao, Christ the Eternal Tao by Hieromonk Damascene, he does an analysis of like ancient Chinese philosophy, right? So he looks at similarities. I don't have a problem saying that there's sort of similarities between ancient religious mythology and the religious truths within Orthodox theology, for example, but we have to be very careful about how we go about this. So we would actually say that those mythologies are derivative from our account, from our narrative. We think that we have the true, if you want to call it a perennialism, yeah, it's the true perennialism that goes all the way back to Eden. All right, what is your feeling that, do you think it's meaningful at all that Jews basically created this myth body? And that Jews or whether they created it or it was kind of divinely created, that they're the sort of bearers of it and they are the presenters of it to the white race, for example, or humanity in general. Created what? What did you say at the beginning? Christianity, the New Testament, the Old Testament, the entire myth body appears to have been created. Myth body, that's what I couldn't. Yeah, you're saying. Appears to be created by Jews. And is that meaningful from your perspective? It's very meaningful. We have the promise to, for example, in these successive covenants, we have the promise to Abraham that his descendants would be the lineage through which the Messiah would come. For example, Genesis 12, you have the promise that from his body, from his loins would come the one to whom all the nations would be gathered back into the worship of the God of Israel, right? This is kind of the beginning of it. And we don't see that as out of continuity with what was said to Noah or to Adam. We see a perfect kind of series, again, of covenants. And so then from the period of Abraham, you have this promise that goes all the way through Genesis into the Exodus period. You have promises in Exodus about the coming prophet, greater than Moses. You have all these Psalms, we believe, that predict the birth of the Messiah. Daniel, the prophets, especially when in Daniel 9, he even predicts the empire under which the Messiah would be born. And even the most liberal scholars date the book of Daniel to prior to the first century, right? So the latest, most liberal dating for Daniel is the 2nd century BC, during the time of the Maccabees. I actually believe it's an older book, but even if you took the most liberal view, it's very fascinating because Daniel still predicts successive empires. Most scholars agree that the last one is the Roman Empire, and he says that under this Roman Imperium, the Messiah would be born. In Daniel 9:24-27, he says that the temple would be done away with. He says that the Jewish sacrifices and ceremonies would be done away with. The Messiah would institute eternal righteousness, everlasting life, and that's precisely what we think happened under in the 1st century when Jesus came. And then in 70 AD, most of these messianic prophecies and the end of the Mosaic administration are actually fulfilled in 70 AD. So Jesus predicts this, for example, in Luke 21, Matthew 24. He says, you will see Israel surrounded by Roman armies, and he says they're going to crush and raze the temple. Not one of these stones will be left on one another. He actually tells the disciples standing in front of him that they'll see this. For us, that's very important because, as most of the church fathers say in unison, that was actually fulfilled in 70 AD when Titus Vespasian sacked Jerusalem. So we see all of that as very important covenantal fulfillments.
Wait, now is it meaningful to you at all that the God is Jewish, that Yahweh is a Jewish God, effectively?
Again, the revelation to our forebearers includes people who were not Jewish. So we believe that Adam was not Jewish. We believe that Noah was not Jewish. There were many righteous people who were not Jewish. And then God called the tribe of Israel to be his people, or what we call the church of the Old Testament, for a time period. So we don't have any problem with that being the means by which God used to bring about the birth of the Messiah. In our view, there's nothing inherently genetically inferior or superior when it comes to Jewish DNA. They are human beings like everyone else. They had a role in bringing forth the Messiah, and then once the Messiah came, they had the duty to accept him, and of course they did not. And that's where you get, of course, the splitting between Christianity and what would eventually become Talmudic post-temple Judaism, rabbinic Judaism. So I'm not sure God, we would not say is quote unquote Jewish because we believe God is Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. But if you mean in the sense of Christ being the fulfillment of the promises to the Jews and to the whole world, then yes. So that's why he is able to unite both Jew and Gentile back into God's family covenant relationship.
And why do you feel that that's necessary, that Jews and Gentiles are united through Christianity?
Because we have,
because it seems like
a common origin in Adam. We have a common descendant. So for us, Genesis
sure. And the whole world kind of shares that common origin as well. We would agree, right? So correct. In your view, the idea of kind of the sort of continuance or furtherance of the white race, that's not really a kind of aim or objective or even really a concern of the church. You probably agree, right?
Well, the church has the concern to be careful about the preservation and livelihood of all people groups. And so that's why, for example, in Matthew 28, when Jesus talks about the Great Commission, he actually says, go forth and baptize all the ethnoi. So we don't have a problem with the rights and maintenance of existing people groups and nations that are out there. I attend a Russian Orthodox church. If you read the Russian Orthodox Church's statement on nationhood, they talk about the pros of being patriotic, of preserving your tradition, your people. Nothing wrong with that. But we also have the very important Byzantine tradition, which also doesn't want nation in the sense of ethnic divisions to become preeminent over the universality of the church. So we see it as kind of a hierarchy, and the Byzantine model was always intent upon having a balance between the many ethnoi and the one imperium. So that's actually the traditional Orthodox perspective. It's neither, there's always a balance of the one and the many. That's why we don't ever want to fall into dialectics. We always want to balance, the rights of the Greeks within the imperium with the rights of, the Africans within the imperium, right? Everybody should have the right to continue within this larger imperium. That was the model that eventually became the norm in the church.
Hey, Ralph, I don't know where to go with this. I think we don't really have a point of discussion because I believe that Christianity is wholly fabricated, is entirely parabolic.
Can I respond to you about that?
Well, let me finish my statement because you talked uninterrupted for a very long period of time. And I actually, so what you're saying is not like there's not really a point of discussion. Your view is that these stories are fundamentally true, and that even the story in the Garden of Eden is not a parable that was developed by Jews. My view is that Jews developed these parables in a kind of ethnocentric way because they were interested in kind of achieving a sort of dominance over Aryans, in the sense that they were gaining a kind of sort of advantage over them psychologically. They were positing a Jewish God as kind of a chief or central deity for Europeans and all people effectively.
Let me ask you this, Mark. What makes you say that? What makes you say these things? You said you decoded some certain things. What brings you to that conclusion?
It's evident. It's evident, right? So the propaganda of Christianity, right, developed through the New Testament and through, but especially through the New Testament, because that's ostensibly the bridge to the Gentile world, was interested in positing a Jewish figure as the savior or Messiah of not only the Europeans, but of the entire human race, right? So it was obviously a kind of a power move, or it was a kind of psychological move to show a kind of ethnic dominance and have Europeans bowing down to a Jewish God. I mean, to my mind, it's very clear. I mean, the only way that you would not come to the conclusion is that if you accept the myths in Christianity to effectively be true. In that case, then, yeah, sure. I mean, anything goes. I mean, right? Maybe God is a Jew. Maybe Yahweh is the actual God. Maybe Christ is the kind of most important figure religiously in the world. But in my view, it's just false. These are clearly invented stories.
Yeah. Okay, well, that's arbitrary. That's ad hoc.
Well, I think that they were evidently invented stories.
Yeah, that's called being arbitrary.
Well, we can get into the kind of details here.
No, that's a fallacy.
So, yeah, get into it, because you're saying evident. Like, what makes it evident? I guess is I'm kind of trying to push you towards maybe expanding a little bit here.
Well, on the most obvious level,
that's called being circular, dude.
On the most, dude, I don't even know what you're talking about. Right? Seriously, let me just finish.
You just say something is evident and it's obvious.
Let me just finish. All right. Before you start spending this, let me just make a remark here. So that actually is not, going anywhere. It's literally circular, as you would say. All right. So yeah, what I would say is the following. The resurrection of Christ is very hard to believe. That someone died, was in a tomb for 3 days, and then resurrected. And that's sort of the kind of most important point, as far as I can tell, that people are required to believe in as Christians. The other things that are unbelievable is the turning the water into wine, right? In my view, these are clearly.
Well, I've never seen those things happen. I'll give you that, but yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, but these are clearly, in my mind, it seems like these are very clearly taken, from the Bacchus cult, for example, as was a lot of the symbolism around the Eucharist, right? With the wine, the blood wine, these are all taken from the Bacchus cult, effectively. So we see, pre-existing myths from which the Christian myth is derived, or the Dionysus cult, if that's more familiar to people. And so, but the other miracles that appear there as well. He's healing a leper. I mean, I think all these things are kind of 100% allegorical, as Jay would say. So in other words, none of the events are actually true. So even if it were the case that there was a historical Jesus, which I think the jury is definitely out on that one, the thing is entirely mythological, and so there's actually no kind of real basis for us to have a discussion, because he's not going to accept, if I have some reading or interpretation of some biblical myth, he's not going to accept it right away because he believes it to be true on some level, or it hasn't been intelligently developed.
Well, I guess the discussion is
trying to make a point.
You
right?
saying why it's not true and him saying why it is. I mean, that's the discussion, right? I mean, it's not. I didn't expect you to come in here and
you see how the debate quickly runs out of steam, because he's like, well, yeah, I believe these things which I consider to be unbelievable to be true, and there's no actually response from me. Well, it seems like it's false because it looks like they're derived from other myths, and the events that are being described in the New Testament, for example, are fabulous events that don't look, that have never occurred at any other point in history. So So those would be my remarks. And I guess the other thing too, I mean, I guess the only other interesting thing, and the other reason that there's no kind of like point where we can sort of debate is because I think his goals are kind of foreign from my goals as well. I mean, my goals are, I'm interested in the kind of the well-being, the success, especially of the white race and of Aryans. And
well, so you guys are at odds. I mean, that's the whole point of a debate, right? Well, I mean, I didn't expect you to come here and agree.
Yeah. But you see what I'm saying, out of respect to Jay, because Jay, I think, is a fascinating guy, and I think he's highly intelligent, and I think he knows his shit backwards and forwards. So I would never question that. But there is almost no place of intersection where we can have a debate, because we don't share the same goal. So if we had the same goals, we could say, hey, this is a better way to get to that goal. And I think I already outlined the other points of disagreement, which make a kind of a further debate kind of fruitless, I would say.
Well, I think that that's where you're getting to the heart of the matter, is that we have different paradigms, different presuppositions from which we come. And in fact, it's the paradigms and the presuppositions that we have that determine the things that we think are possible. You come from a paradigm where you don't believe that the miraculous events are possible. I come from a different one. And so I believe the way that we resolve those kinds of questions and conflicts is by a comparison of the two paradigms, and to see which belief system is coherent. So I don't believe in like a enlightenment type of view of how certainty and epistemology works, where we just like test things and we figure out if it's a brute fact, whether it's true or not. We actually have to look at belief systems and paradigms as a whole. And I think that if we consider all the different categories of things that make up life, such as providence and the regularity of nature, which gives us the possibility of doing science, when we look at numbers, when we look at abstract entities and categories, how they could exist, like the laws of logic, they point us to things like a singular divine mind. They point us to there being objective moral standards and categories, right and wrong. They point us in the direction of something that would be connected to history, right? We have this great lineage of both the Bible and the Byzantine Imperium that's part of what makes up Orthodoxy. For example, we have liturgy. We have nations that still profess Orthodoxy in the modern world today. So we have this culture building machine, but it's not just a culture building machine. It also goes beyond that into the realm of the transcendent. It actually tells us about God himself. So I think that and I'm not trying to be rude to Mark, but I think that what I heard in the response there was, again, more of this sort of arbitrary kind of ad hoc prejudicial conjecture, which in debate is actually a fallacy, where you just come to the table and you say, well, I just think that that's absurd. It's self-evident. These stories are not true because I've never seen a miracle happen before. Well, it really kind of depends on how we define a miracle and what we think is possible. And I think that if you believe in the existence of God in the Bible, et cetera, then that's kind of the ultimate governing presuppositions about what you believe is and isn't possible. So the Bible, for example, makes a unique claim about itself. It says that it's a unique book that is guided and inspired by divine providence and kept from error. And one testimony that we have to that is one of the examples that Jesus himself gave when he said to the Jews who didn't believe in him. The Jews said, what proof do you give us that you are the Messiah? Do a miracle for us, they say, right? And this is kind of what we're getting from, ironically, Mark here, who positions himself as, of course, the very anti-Jew position. He's actually making the exact same argument that the Pharisees made to Jesus. And Jesus' response was, if you really want to know the proof, go search the scriptures that you believe in, because the scriptures actually predict me in many, many, many places. I gave an example of Daniel 9 earlier, a specific prophecy predicting the timing of the birth of the Messiah. So there you have a clear evidence, a clear proof, and even liberal scholars date that prior to the coming of Christ. How is that even possible? Now, if the Bible is inspired, that's the kind of things that we would expect. We would expect prophecies dated prior to the coming of the Messiah that specifically predict his birth, under what empire, how it would go down, the removal of the Jewish temple and ceremonies, et cetera, which all came to pass in 70 AD. So from that paradigm, it makes perfect sense. But of course, Mark doesn't have a believing paradigm. He has an unbelieving paradigm. So we're not ever going to resolve that kind of question until we challenge paradigms. And I think when reading Mark's Apolloism 3.0, I see the same sort of flaws that he is attributing over here on our side. I see Mark wanting to have a lot of these things that are biblical and then kind of reconstructing them into his own kind of philosophy and perspective, which I think is arbitrary.
I think you're arbitrary as well, right? So we're at a kind of
where was I arbitrary specifically?
In calling my position arbitrary.
Well, I mean, are you not arguing for kind of your own religion here? Is it not kind of like let me set this forth as a new religion?
Well, I'm arguing...
Wait, let me ask you this. What is Apolloism? And I have a question here from the chat, from the Lino chat as well, but I just want to ask you that first.
Apolloism? Well, it's the veneration of...
Your definition of it, yeah. Or your...
Sure, yeah. Well, so, through my sort of studying myth, I've come to the conclusion, I think the very reasonable conclusion, that Apollo is effectively an archetype for Aryan man. And now there's a number of reasons to believe that. He's the Hyperborean, he's the northern invader, he's this blonde, I mean, it's kind of obvious on some level. And, so in any case, he effectively, as a kind of mythological archetype, is equivalent to the Aryan race, right? So he becomes an object of veneration, which is ultimately the veneration of one's own people. Now, the formulation is actually very similar to Judaism in a lot of ways. Judaism also, I argue, basically has the embodiment of Jews in this figure of Yahweh, right? So they understand Yahweh to effectively be a kind of like, an epitomatic Jew, as it were, like the sort of ideal Jew, as it were. And so it's not dissimilar, actually, from Judaism in that regard, in the sense that they choose, and I think, intelligently, and again, I wouldn't want Jay to kind of mischaracterize my position on Jews. I mean, I think that Jews, are effectively antagonistic to the Aryan race, but I don't think that they are evil. I think that they're just kind of another sort of like, macroorganism, as it were, doing their thing, trying to kind of survive in the universe, as it were. Right. So but what I would say is that they have, I think, a pretty sound model for religion, in the sense that they understand their religion is about them. It's about their sort of tribe. And it's about, and my argument is, and my thesis is, that they use these sort of parables as a kind of way of understanding their nature and the way to kind of interact with another. And I would use the example that I gave with Laban and Jacob as one example. So that becomes an understanding of the way that they deal with the other, right? Whether it's the Aryan, or the white person, as it were. That's my argument, effectively. I argue that we need tribal gods, and that it is actually sort of fundamentally demoralizing on a kind of deep psychological level to place another race above you in the form of this kind of epitomatic God, whether it's in the form of Yahweh or if it's in the form of Christ. I think it's actually a kind of demoralizing thing. And I think it's something that's kind of easily understandable, that it's something that, like, for example, if a kid is watching a boxing match and there's a white boxer fighting a black boxer, on some sort of deep psychological level, if the black boxer prevails over the white boxer, he's going to be demoralized, because effectively what he's looking at is a kind of mirror, right? And he's seeing a mirror of himself, and he's seeing, or something closer to himself, and he's seeing that mirror lose.
Well, unless he has money on the fight. Never mind. I'm not talking about anybody specific.
Well, yeah, I mean, but that's sort of where we are right now culturally, right?
Let me ask a question. On what you say, for example, at the beginning of the Apolloism paper, that you believe that we should choose can I say a God principle? Because I take you to say that you don't think that they're actually sort of existing ontological gods, right?
Well, so I would say, and this was something I was curious as to whether or not we would get into. And again, I was not excited about it, because I thought it wouldn't be a very useful debate from either of our perspectives. But the idea of whether or not I believe in a God, and I just don't believe in the Jewish God, effectively. Like, okay, in other words, I believe in a purpose, and I believe, and so again, I would posit my sort of ancestors and my descendants as effectively my God, which I think is effectively the Jewish position, right? So I'm effectively doing something similar to what Jews do.
When you say that we should choose Apollo over something like Bacchus, my question is, on what grounds do you know that we should choose that principle over Bacchus?
Well, Bacchus actually is a god. The mythographers thought he was basically Yahweh. They thought that was effectively the same god, right? So in the ancient Roman world, they thought Yahweh and Bacchus were the same god. Tacitus, so that was kind of accepted among mythographers. Tacitus contested it and said, oh, well, Yahweh is kind of this dour god, but I think Tacitus' reading was actually the incorrect reading, because we actually know in the real world that Jews have effectively both faces. I mean, especially religious Jews, we experience them as like these sort of relatively dour characters. But then we know that there are kind of these Hollywood Jews, as it were, or just kind of everyday Jews who might be in a kind of a bacchanal or kind of jovial type or personality, right? So, so effectively, I wouldn't venerate Dionysus because he's effectively the Jewish god. Is the person I wouldn't, right?
So that's called a circular argument. I asked you on what grounds you would know to choose one over the other, and you said because the one.
Look, I told you the reason. I don't want to play this game with a circular argument.
It's not a game. That's how debate works. It's not a game. I'm asking for the metaphysical category by which you know to choose one over the other.
You asked me why I chose one over the other.
No,
right?
I didn't ask you why. I said, what are the grounds upon which you know to choose Apollo over Bacchus? And you said because
I gave you a very coherent explanation that everyone listening to this stream understood. Every single person.
I heard you say that we should choose
every single
Apollo.
person understood it, Jay.
No, you didn't give any grounds or justification. Do you know in logic and debate what justifying a belief or a claim is?
I know that I stated my case, and it was stated clearly and coherently, and everyone listening to the stream understood it. So
you didn't give
whether we want to talk about whatever the hell you're talking about, because clearly it's not,
it's a very simple question. I
explained myself very coherently.
Logical justification.
And actually my explanation was very clear and coherent. And
what is that basis?
And you actually understood it. You actually understood
what is that basis?
Well, Jay, so you argue in a very kind of disingenuous manner. I mean, you understood what I gave a very sound.
Saying you
look, so you're trying to get me on some like stupid technical point.
No, that's how debate works. Debates are based on fallacies and logical
laws. All right, dude.
Oh, yeah. This is what happens in every debate with a pagan. Anytime, or whatever you want to call yourself, anytime we get to the objective categories of logic, this is what they do. They say that you're playing word games, and that's because they don't know basic logic.
You asked me a question, why I chose one god over the other. I gave a very coherent explanation of it.
I didn't ask you why. I asked for the grounds upon which.
Probably was not pleasing to you, because basically I revealed that Yahweh and Dionysus are essentially the same god. So now everyone in the audience knows that Yahweh and Dionysus are the same god.
I understand what you're saying. I understand what you think. Right.
Seriously. So now you're trying to hit me on circular bullshit.
I'm asking you a different question.
Come on.
I'm asking you a different question. I understand what you're saying. I understand that you believe that Bacchus is equated with the Jewish god. I understand that. I'm asking you on what grounds you know to choose one over the other, and you didn't give me any justified grounds, because that's
all right. Well, okay, maybe my explanation wasn't thorough enough. I don't know if I got interrupted. But
so let me flesh out what
Apollo represents the Aryan figure. Dionysus represents effectively a Jewish figure, right? A kind of pro-degeneracy Jewish figure, right? So I chose Apollo because he actually represents a kind of more salubrious example, potentially, depending on how that cult is developed and handled, because it's a veneration of the Aryan man and of the Aryan race. Right. And that, in my view, is a more salubrious direction for the success of Aryan people and white people in general on the face of the earth.
So
it's a model similar to
that one because it's a better direction to go in.
Yeah. Did that answer your question, or was I
right? And that's not a justification for the grounds upon which you know to choose one or the other.
I told you why.
So it's a value judgment. You're judging one to be bad and one to be good, and I'm asking you upon what categories or principles you know.
Well, one is the kind of good.
And you said that one's good that I choose because it's the one that's good.
You're going to talk about some technical point here, but if you're actually interested to know my answer, are you interested to know my answer? Or,
I'm interested in getting you to understand where you're being circular.
Okay. All right. All right, you may have to mute.
No, it's okay. I can handle it. Go ahead. Just
All right, no. So the reason is because Dionysus is a kind of a pro-degeneracy god, as it were, right? So he was a god, and the Athenian theater, for example, was established. It was a cult dedicated to Dionysus, right? And
why is it wrong to choose good over degeneracy? Do you not understand that question?
So good, you mean, yeah, so I'm choosing non-degeneracy over degeneracy.
Okay, but I want to know why. That's the question. On what grounds?
Well, because degeneracy, like, when a animal is dying, it's understood as degenerate. I mean, the word degenerate is related to death,
maybe it's good for a lot of animals to die. On what grounds is it bad to choose that?
To choose life over death? Is that your question?
On what grounds is it wrong to choose degeneracy?
So is your question, seriously, Jay, is your question?
Yeah, because your system
should I
is
choose life over death? No, seriously, I mean, listen to yourself.
It's relativistic.
Yeah, come on, dude, look, come on.
Yeah, it's relativism. You can't justify relativism. That's the argument.
Right, now you're just kind of like throwing out these words. So look, honestly,
it's a very well-known word in debate. Most of the modern world is relativistic.
Jay, I gave you the explanation as to why I chose Apollo over Dionysus, and it was
very
coherent. It wasn't arbitrary.
It's circular because
it's in any manner. No, it's because one is a kind of pro-degenerate god.
Do you know what relativism is?
Yeah, Jay, I know what relativism is.
Okay, so how is your position not relativistic?
Well, who the fuck cares if it's relativistic or not? I'm telling you, I just give you the explanation.
That's where you just lost.
All right. Oh, yeah. I'm sure I really lost that.
You did.
How can you say, Jay? How can you say?
Logic knows.
Honestly, Jay, how can you say that I lost this debate when it's
been
revealed today? No, when it's been revealed tonight to many people that Yahweh and Dionysus are the same God.
Yeah, but
that's pretty devastating. That's pretty devastating to the whole basis of Christianity and Judaism in general.
Relativism is devastating to any debater, and that's why you just lost, just like JF lost.
Look, Jay, no one but you cares about that. I mean, literally, I think everyone listening to this debate, it's like, Jay, you're being completely autistic. No, what are you even talking about?
This is
the guy is trying to make a point.
Basic level debate where
you're like you're having a short.
If you affirm relativism, you've lost the debate.
You're having a short fuse here, dude. Are you going to say circular?
I'm doing great.
Come on, dude. You're having a short fuse here, man. You're having a.
I'm not mad at you. I'm not mad at you at all.
Well, look, I have to admit, I am a little irritated because I think the debate is basically over because there's actually there's no point where we could actually agree on anything. You believe
you're a relativist, no.
You believe in these sort of fabulous myths that were invented by Jews, and I argue it to the detriment of Aryans that would inherit them and adopt them.
You surrender the debate when you affirm relativism.
Well, look, Jay, you're actually not even talking about anything now. You're just kind of like you're going into some weird autistic mode, and it's just some like self-defense.
Do you realize that the last people who tried to do this debate and said exactly what you said, they're crushed, right? Like you can't affirm relativism and go into a debate. Do you not understand that?
Jay, no one gives a shit, dude. This is like, you're really off on your own.
Give a shit. So
you're off on your own tangent. Let me ask you a question. How do you feel about the fact that your God, Yahweh, or like sort of the basis of your religion, is effectively the equivalent of Dionysus or Bacchus? I mean, how's that feel?
I don't believe that.
Well, a lot of people, living at the time when these things were apparent, mythographers reported.
How many times are you going to appeal to vox populum, appeal to the masses? That's actually a fallacy.
What are you appealing to?
It might actually be a good idea if you were going to go into a debate to know the basic fallacies. That might be a good idea next time.
Jay, look, dude, this is, you're getting nowhere with this. I guarantee you. Because people are actually going to be interested. People are actually going to be interested in what I have to say now, right? Because I'm actually decoding things in a real way. I basically have fucking decoded the whole Hebrew Bible in a very significant way, dude. People are going to be kind of shocked what that document actually represents.
Okay.
And you're going to be one of these people who are left defending it, right? Mm-hmm. And you're going to be, using all these, these kind of they name debate tactics or whatever. Yeah. But the more important argument here, though, is that Christianity is developed in a kind of consciously hostile way against the white race by people who are intelligently developing parables, as they intelligently develop parables now in Hollywood, using it with a very kind of careful and intelligent, knowledgeable understanding of symbol. And look, dude, I gave you just one example. I've got fucking hundreds of examples that will tear that thing down.
You are an important guy. You're very important. I know.
Well, look, dude, I know fear when I feel it, dude. I know fear when I see it. You know what I'm saying, dude? So
you think
that whole no, that whole thing is done. That whole Christianity, New Testament shit, that's done. The thing is obviously hostile to the interests of the white race. And that was identified. That was identified in a very kind of cursory way by Nietzsche, right? But I've gone through in a way that Nietzsche did not. I went to the next level, and I basically decoded the whole thing. So I understand now. I understand the Jewish. I understand the Jewish use of symbol, right? Which you could not understand because you're a Christian. Right, you can't actually understand it. So you're sort of inside this kind of crazy world.
Okay,
it's a kind of hermetic world where you believe, Adam was descending out of.
I can give an account for logical laws.
No. I'm getting look.
You're just rambling, dude. You're just rambling about how awesome you are. Nobody gives a shit about how awesome you are.
Oh, that's not something you do, Jay. Oh, you don't talk about how awesome.
I haven't said anything about how awesome.
All right, Jay.
This is crazy.
Look, all right, so look, you understand where we're at, Ralph. I mean, I think
not really, to be honest.
All right. I mean, I think his whole religion is a kind of mythology, and that
we know that,
and it's a very kind of simple point to make, and it's a point that's, I'm going to say it's obvious.
I can at least give an account for objective truth and right and wrong, at least in my worldview. And you said you're a relativist.
All right. Well, so how am I objective? How am I objectively wrong?
Because relativism is self-refuting.
Look, dude. Address one of my arguments and point to where it's wrong. That's what I want you to do.
You affirmed relativism.
Look, and the other thing too is you wouldn't even take on the Jacob. You still haven't given me an explanation for the Jacob Laban parable. You still haven't done it.
I believe it's what it says. I don't think that it's a parable. I denied it's a parable.
All right, and Adam and Eve is also a parable.
Yeah, I mean, you can come here and state your position all day.
Is Adam and Eve real life? I mean,
are they real life? They're real people.
All right, so they describe real events. I mean, come on.
I've said that since the beginning of the debate.
Ralph, I don't know what to do with this, dude. It's just I feel like I'm in an insane asylum. Honestly, I feel like I'm.
Well, I don't affirm.
Welcome to the kill stream.
I mean, you believe that morals and truth are relative. That's actually insane. That's an insane view. You believe you're creating a new cult. That's insane.
I don't think that I'm creating a new cult. I think
you just said you've gone beyond Nietzsche. You say you're going to create a new religion with religious vestments and everything.
No, look, I don't. I think that I've gone beyond Nietzsche. I stand on Nietzsche's shoulders, and I'm sort of furthering.
You said it earlier.
Right? I'm continuing his work. That doesn't mean that I'm forming a cult. It means I'm continuing his work.
You say in your essay you are.
Oh, you're talking about Apolloism. Yeah, well, I think that I think the Apollo cult will form. I think it will form. That's my prediction.
Okay, so you're forming a cult.
I'm predicting. Yeah. It's a prophecy. Yeah, you should be familiar with that.
You believe in relativism. It's total nonsense.
It's not nonsense, dude. It's no more nonsense than the completely obviously.
I don't even think you know what that is. I think you're so you don't know what relativism is. Do you know what that is?
Dude, come on, Jay.
This is
why do you act? Seriously, why do you act in such an insulting manner?
Okay, so you don't know what that is.
No. Can I just ask you a question? Why do you act in such an insulting manner? Why are you?
Because I don't understand why
you're kind of a dick. I just want to know. I'm asking for the audience. Why do you behave like an ass and a dick? Seriously, you won't even let me do. Yeah, but this is not a debate.
Involves
because you're not interested in honestly discussing the matter.
Attributing ill motives to me is a fallacy. I want to know how you affirm relativism and don't contradict yourself. It's a very simple question. What is relativism? I don't think that you even know what it is.
Jay, look, dude, we have to move off it. So, Jay, what you've revealed is that you don't want to talk about the topic at hand because my arguments are just
I'm sorry, devastating to your perspective.
I mean, I'm basically
it's the exact same debate that I have with Bog Lord Dave.
You have a kind of mystical mindset.
I asked you a question about logic, basic.
You believe in fairy tales.
I asked you.
Well, I don't.
Well, that's funny.
You're hardly one to talk about
so I believe in fairy
You're
tales,
hardly
but
one
you
to
can't
talk
answer
about
a basic question
Jay,
about logic.
How can you talk about logic? You believe in Jesus walking on water. You believe for Jesus.
Yeah, but you believe you are
so how are you logical?
I already gave the argument earlier.
You're not logical,
I can give an account for logic.
You're actually exhibiting the signs of madness. If to actually believe
Dude,
those things,
you believe that you're starting a cult that will restore the Aryan race. You're insane. I'm not mad.
I'm predicting that Apolloism is going forward.
You also believe in relativism, dude.
It. You know what I mean? I'm just making a sort of kind of what I believe to be a sort of deduction that I think that this will be something that
just totally got crushed.
I don't think it got crushed, dude. You can't just.
You don't know what relativism is. You don't even know a basic philosophical term. You don't know a basic logical law. You don't know a basic fallacy. It would be a good idea to come to. If you're going to come to a debate, you might want to know those things.
On this, Jay? Are we still on this? Or because you can't actually discuss the actual points of the argument?
I've already refuted you. When you said you don't understand the implications of being a relativist.
Laban story. People are still wondering. They're going to accept my explanation.
I already said it's not a parable.
My explanation is compelling. Yours accepts that these sort of stories that were developed are actually real stories. Yeah, right?
Right. Yeah, and I gave a case for that, and that's fine if people want to accept that or reject that. But then when we ask you what relativism is, you don't know.
Dude, I know what relativism.
What is it?
It's I don't have to fucking explain this to you. This is not the point of the debate, dude.
Yeah. Okay.
Also, Gator is setting up. Let me say this. Let me say this. Hold on. Let me say this real quick.
Hairbrain cult, bro.
I see Gator.
Know what relativism is, so.
Gator is setting up the bot. If you guys want to hang loose, and some people want to call in. I don't know if you're interested in that or not, but I see Psycho Dad in the Lino chat says he's asking you a question. Mark, was creating a religion that calls them cunts, I guess them being Jews, part of the Jews' plan? That was a question from the Lino chat.
I don't. Can you repeat the question?
Was creating a religion that calls them cunts part of the Jews' plan?
Calls them cunts?
Well, yeah.
I don't understand.
That's the question. I mean, I'm assuming some of the negativity around the Jews killing Christ and stuff like that maybe is what they're talking about.
Yeah, look, as I've said, I think that Jews are actually have, I mean, I think that their way of going about it is obviously much different than ours. They're kind of an inherently sort of deceptive people, as it were, because they're trying to kind of take advantage of our success and our resources. And that's basically their model. That's kind of their evolutionary model. So the cult that I'm proposing, or the cult that I'm predicting rather, is that it's going to be also a tribal cult. It's going to be a racially based cult, and it's going to be concerned with the, honoring ancestors and interested in the well-being and prosperity and success of descendants, effectively. And also in a kind of eugenic way, too, thinking eugenically about these things.
Do you have anything to add to that, Jay?
No.
Let's see. I see a Lino chat. First one says, Wetrun says, tips Fedora. Tara Chester says, Mark sees what he wants and claims it's obvious. Then Tara says, Mark's interpretation is purely mythological. What would you say to that, Mark?
I don't, what's his counter explanation? I don't know. I mean, I actually wrote, people can go to my website and actually check out the explanation where I wrote it down in kind of clear and detailed terms. Go to ApollonianTransmission.com, and it's actually it's in the first article on that site. It's basically, you can go to the menu. It's called REM, Racial Esoteric Moralization. So take a look at it. I mean, if you actually have an open mind, or or if you have some kind of religious grudge, I mean, you're not going to like the site. Frankly. So, but anyways.
All right. Tina says, Jay, you just affirmed homosexuality. Sorry, bud. I think that was going back in the conversation. I'm not sure which part they're referring to.
No.
Yeah, I don't
remember that.
Let's see. Tara says, Mark, this whole chat gives. Not sure if that's a typo, and you're dumb. Tara then says, tell us how smart you are. Sargon Jr. Tina says, I cringe the entire time. Jay is gay. Mark is dumb. Wetrun says, look, dude. Tara Chester says, Mark, literally smarter than Nietzsche. Selfnar0747 says, I decoded all this. This dude's so far up his own ass. Now, what is the decoded thing? I was trying to draw you out on that a little bit earlier. Like, how did you...
I mean, look, and I, you know, honestly, and I actually consider it a somewhat modest activity. I'm just shocked that no one else has actually took the time to actually do it and figure it out. But basically, I have been studying Jewish art in general, including, you know, the Hebrew Bible and the New Testament, which is constantly referenced in contemporary works of Jewish esoteric moralization, is what I call the phenomena. And basically, I've been seeing sort of the pattern, the use of symbols, what the reason, the meanings that they attach, for example, to lambs or goats, or to unleavened bread, and to, you know, wood, and to fire, and all these things. There's sort of these kind of repeating motifs that occur in the Hebrew Bible, and I've been looking at the pattern and figuring out what they're actually saying. You know, basing it also on a kind of realistic view of the way that Jews sort of operate in the world vis-a-vis non-Jews or Aryans. And so, I mean, that's sort of the long and short of it. And I think that I've made incredible progress in this field. I actually, you know, what I call it, I actually feel that I'm just resurrecting effectively a Roman interpretation, right? So the Romans had a way of looking at the mythologies of other peoples and effectively deciphering the meaning of those myths. And often you would have gods that are either effectively chthonic gods or celestial and Aryan gods. And Christ is an example of a chthonic god. He's a dying and rising chthonic god, effectively. And he's similar to Bacchus, Adonis, Dumazed. I mean, he has many precedents. And all these sort of, I've classed all these dying and rising gods, this is my speculation and theory, as effectively Semitic gods. Right, they represent, you know, vines, vegetation gods, whatever the case may be. So that's kind of the long and short of it. And I, you know, look, I was getting heated under the collar because I felt like Jay was antagonizing me. So I didn't mean to like get too big for my britches, but I was in the heat of the moment. So, but I actually I do think that I am onto something pretty big and useful and important. But I'm also modest in the sense that I feel like I'm just kind of the only person who just kind of, you know, just took the time to actually do it. And I, you know, modeled my thinking to one extent or another after Nietzsche. So.
All right. I see a question from or I guess a comment from Black Goat in the chat. It says, all religions have symbols. Then he threw in an insult. I'll leave the insult out. But he says, Christianity stems from Judaism. Makes sense that there is crossover symbols. What would you say to that, Mark?
Yeah, it's absolutely the case. Of course, they're drawing from the same symbol language, 100%. Right. So the lamb, for example, has the same significance in the New Testament as it does in the Hebrew Bible, for example. But in the significance of wood, the significance of vines, all these things. And ultimately, they become, in a lot of cases, they become effectively ethnic identifiers. So in other words, Jews are differentiating between Aryans and Jews. You know, vine, stone, these are all Jewish symbols, effectively. And yeah, but I mean, parables have to be read in a very kind of close manner. So simultaneously, there's a kind of symbol language, but then there's a kind of contextual aspect of parables where you have to look at them closely and figure out actually what they're saying. Every parable is basically a riddle, and Jews basically design, you know, they have a Hebrew word that effectively means riddle and parable. It has two meanings. It means riddle and parable. And that's how they design these things, as riddles that are ultimately decipherable because they're communicating to other Jews effectively.
So your stance is that Christianity is a Jewish conspiracy, basically, or some type of Jewish plot.
I mean, look, that's sort of a kind of dramatic way of saying it, but I think, yes, it was developed in a kind of cynical way as a way of basically drawing Aryans, vulnerable Aryans, or Europeans especially, but non-white or, you know, non-Jews in general, into a cult, right? And, you know, earlier cults had existed with kind of the same premise. And the reason that it is such a powerful cult is because it is done in such a conscious and intelligent way, with a very careful and knowledgeable and intelligent use of symbol language. That's how they do it. So they make these religions effectively. And my theory is that, you know, they are probably as well responsible for the Adonis cult that preceded it. And there's many reasons why you would believe that. They also emerged from the Saturn cult. This is very clear. The mythographers make this clear. Jews emerged from the Saturn cult. They also emerged from the Vulcan cult, right? So all of these things, they are kind of experts as symbolists in making religions and developing religions. My thesis is that the only sort of really kind of salubrious Aryan religions have been the cult of Hadad Baal, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, and from there Jupiter, Mars, Apollo, and maybe there's a couple that I'm missing in there. But those are cults where we see an Aryan chieftain at the head of the cult.
So I'm not disagreeing or agreeing, but I'm trying to, I guess what would pop to my mind would be, what about all the Jews that were, the pogroms and all that stuff throughout history that were killed by Christians?
Sure. Yeah. I'll give you the response to that. Well, first of all, in Christianity has actually been, and I don't think this is even necessarily something that Jay would disagree with, because I think that Christianity has actually been relatively kind to Jews, and in a moral way, there's in a kind of Christian moral way, there's certainly nothing wrong with that. But they've actually been, and often have kind of provided a sort of sanctuary for Jews, as it were, and that it's rather kind of an aberration where you see like real conflicts appear between the church and Jews, right? So in other words, Jews have faced the most hostility in Europe from like peasants and laborers, but they've often been very friendly with both kings, and also they've had a good relationship with the church. The church has only very infrequently, like for example during the fuck is it called? You know what I'm talking? The Spanish Inquisition. I mean that was.
It was just mentioned in chat. Yeah.
So that would be my argument, and so, but as it concerns, for example, this parable of Christ and the Pharisees, there I see what I call a caducean relationship between Christ and the Pharisees. Caducean in the sense that basically we see effectively false oppositions, right?
Yeah, this is nonsense.
We see false.
All right, let him finish up, and I did want to get your response to all that. I was just kind of trying to get some more discussion points. We also have the bot loaded up. We'll take some callers. Go ahead, finish up, Mark, and then I'll let Jay go.
Yeah, so my thesis is, and what I believe to be the case, is that Jews had become so unpopular at that point, and effectively anti-Semitism was so strong that they basically, to make a religion, a cult like Adonis, to have like another Adonis or Bacchus cult, they effectively had to like throw themselves under the bus, so to speak, create effectively a false opposition, right? And so that false opposition, and actually the story is very interesting in the sense that like Christ is effectively this character who wants to like convert everyone and bring everyone into his kingdom under one kingdom. And he, in a sense, is kind of like a sort of MLK figure, right? So if you consider the two opposing forces of the Pharisees and Christ, you see effectively an opposition similar to what you would find with like Malcolm X and MLK, right? So the Pharisees represent effectively separatists, right? Jay, I hear you laughing, but this is actually 100% on point. You know it. So Pharisees all right.
All right, go ahead, Mark. Go ahead. Finish it up, and I'll let Jay.
The actual sort of, well, look, I would appreciate if the guy doesn't start like kind of laughing.
Well, I can't control if he's laughing.
No, but I mean, he just comes off as like kind of an asshole. That's why things get antagonistic, because the guy's like, oh, he doesn't know the politics.
Yeah, I mean, when you say it,
look, dude,
hard not to laugh.
Try to fucking learn some fucking manners, right? And then I won't get like this. Seriously.
Well, I'm not worried that you're getting like that, dude.
All right. Well, yeah.
All right, go ahead, Mark. Finish up your thought here, and then we'll get Jay in.
In any case, so that's actually that's basically the argument. So the Pharisees, the word Pharisee, it actually means separated one. The Pharisees were interested actually in being racially separate, right? Christ was not interested in that. Right, and we have the famous from Galatians: there is neither Jew nor Gentile, nor slave or free, nor is there male and female, for you are all one in Christ. So there is a kind of explicit sort of multicultural aspect to Christianity in the sense that he wants everyone to kind of be following Christ in one big happy family. Mm-hmm. And so there is that kind of multicultural aspect to it. But then there are also, so on an explicit level, that's the case. So a lot of good stuff in there. Anyways, did you want to respond?
Yeah, go ahead, Jay.
Yeah, I do. So basically the first thing in Acts 7, when Stephen is replying about the accusations that he's getting from the Pharisees and the Jews, he actually calls out the very thing that Mark talked about. In Acts 7:43, he talks about, and this is actually, if you have if it's using the Septuagint, it'll point this out. if the New Testament is citing the Septuagint. It says that you took up the tabernacle of Moloch and the star of your god Remphan. So he's actually rebuking the Jews for, in the past, falling into idolatry. This, of course, leads to Stephen being a martyr. Stephen is stoned by the Jews, by the Pharisees. Christ is put to death by Pharisees. Pharisees are the ones who were the main drivers of the persecution of Christianity. Of course, Paul was a Pharisee before he converted. So Paul's characterization that there's this false, controlled opposition between Jesus and the Pharisees is nonsensical. And then he goes on to say that Jesus is here to be a kind of kumbaya universal character who wants to destroy everybody's ethnicity. The entirety of church history points to the fact that the Byzantine Imperium, as I already mentioned, was intent on balancing this ethnos and nation state in the midst of the imperium. So it's just completely contrary to church history. It's completely contrary to the many attempts of both Jew and Gentile to persecute Christianity. And that's why the New Testament is very clear that Herod and Pontius Pilate together are guilty of putting Christ to death. So there's an equal blame there upon both the pagan Roman Imperium and the Jewish Pharisees and leaders. So it's completely wrong the way that he's characterized this. It's basic church history. If you knew about, I mean, who does he think was behind the murder of millions of Russian Christians? Was that a secret Pharisee plot to pretend to be murdering millions of Russians and making them martyrs in the last century? I mean, this is just ridiculous.
Yeah, I don't see how he effectively contradicted what I said. I mean, so basically, wow. The narrative that appears in the New Testament, just to kind of repeat the point, is basically it's a conflict loosely, it's a conflict between the Pharisees and Jesus Christ. And Jesus Christ is someone who's interested, including everyone, both Jews and non-Gentiles, in the faith. And so inherently, it's a kind of a mixing faith, as it were. He's interested in having all people kind of live together in one kind of Christian community, as it were. And with the Pharisees, it's not the case. They're interested in being separatists. So racial separatism becomes a kind of goat, as it were, a bad example in the New Testament. Those are the bad guys. The bad guys that actually want to be racially separate are the bad guys, right? So you see the kind of trick that's being played there, as it were, right? But this idea, this kind of caducean idea, is something that manifests itself in the real world today in politics very clearly. We're all kind of familiar with this idea of false opposition. We're familiar with this guy, Ben Shapiro, for example, who's this right-leaning, pro-Christian figure. David Frum, who's a right-leaning, pro-Christian figure. I mean, so they are effectively, in a way, kind of advocating for the Christ cult today in the current world, but also as kind of more generally as conservatives. But they're not really conservatives. They're interested kind of in the success of Jews as a group, and they're interested in the power of Jews as a group. As everyone knows, listening to this broadcast, that they are effectively a false opposition. Whereas Jews kind of more generally and more broadly are on the left. So what you do is you set up a false opposition. This is kind of a well-known phenomena. Lenin talks about this, for example. He talks about, if you want to, the way to defeat the opposition is to lead it, or that's a quote that is sometimes attributed to Lenin. So this is effectively what's also happening in the New Testament, is my argument. And I don't see that it's, and the other thing too, ultimately, because really the end game or the goal is to get people to basically worship a Jew as God, right? And so the psychological consequences of that are profound, as everyone should kind of realize or understand intuitively. You're replacing Jupiter, this sort of proud Aryan figure that, young Aryan boys could look up to and be like, oh, that's kick-ass. The guy's a warrior. He is the God. He's our ancestor. He's something to be proud of. You're replacing it with this Jew who is kind of a pro-mixing Jew who's, wants Jews to be mixing with Gentiles, for example. So you see the problems there.
Okay, let me read these. I see Diorio in there. Thanks for the contributions, man. Tara Jester says Mark is religiously recreating the Third Reich. Augie with the Ninjagini. I'm gonna save this. It's about Bunty King. It's a little bit off topic, but I'll put it in my notepad over here. We'll play it towards the end. Let's see. Politically coherent just subscribed for 3 months. Very kind of you. Pro Truth Antimedia just said Jesus called modern Judaism satanic. Well, I guess Jay, if you want to go in on that first, or Mark, one or the other, that's a comment.
If Jay wants to talk to it, I mean, I don't, I certainly will talk to it. But if Jay wants to go,
what's the question exactly?
Well, it's just a comment. Pro Truth Anti-Media says Jesus called modern Judaism satanic.
If we mean rabbinic Judaism, there's an accruing of traditions. Actually, Jesus called the Pharisaic traditions in his day evil and demonic, and that actually goes back to Jeremiah. Jeremiah was actually one of the first to critique the scribal tradition and make criticisms of them as a Jewish prophet. That's in the early chapters of Jeremiah. And Jesus echoes this in Matthew 23 when he says that the Pharisees are basically religious hypocrites. The fact that the Pharisees put Christ to death, I know that Mark doesn't believe that there is historical testimony to the existence of the person of Christ, but of course this assumes that the New Testament itself is not a reliable historical witness, when in fact amongst ancient documents it's one of the most well attested to. We have 5,000 plus ancient manuscripts from the first 3 centuries of Christianity that attest to the veracity and coherency and unicity of the New Testament testimony. That's way more than anything like Plato or Aristotle. Actually, the earliest versions of Plato are the Middle Ages. So what I'm getting at is that we have a lot of this historic witness and testimony to the New Testament, to the apostolic tradition. And when we understand that we can see how what happened with rabbinic Judaism was that it went in a different direction, especially after the removal of the temple. So after the temple was gone, obviously Judaism didn't have its sacrificial component, which was predicted by Jesus and the prophets. If you read Luke 21 and Matthew 24, those are predictions of the removal of the temple system. Hebrews describes this. So actually some of the questions that Mark is raising and curious about, if he would read the book of Hebrews, he would understand how those types were fulfilled and how they were done away. So after the removal of the temple, it became rabbinic Judaism, and it kind of accrued a bunch of traditions that would become the Talmud. Some of those traditions existed prior to the written form of the Talmuds that we have, the Babylonian and the Jerusalem Talmuds and so forth. So we don't actually know the origins of some of the Talmudic texts because they're ancient. But regardless, that's definitely where the two religions begin to diverge, is in the 1st, 2nd, 3rd century for sure. So I'm not sure how that's supposed to play into the fact that modern day Judaism, which is still the rabbinical Talmudic tradition, is obviously not Christian. I just gave the example of antagonism between Jewish communities and Christianity. Of course, he just dismisses that as I don't know what, conspiracy theories or something, like it's all machinations behind the scenes, as if a bunch of martyred Russians and Russian Orthodox, that was all just like a faux martyrdom. I mean, yeah, I mean, if he should go to an Orthodox church and learn about, the Tsar and what happened to the Tsar. We honor the Czar in many Orthodox churches.
Why do you think that I'm denying those historical events?
You said that Christianity has always been on cozy secret terms with Judaism or something like this.
Judaism can operate independently of Christianity, and it often does, right?
Obviously.
So I wouldn't deny that Jews were responsible for some terrible crimes in communist Russia. No.
You don't think that was an attack on Christianity? I mean, your argument has been that Christianity.
Well, look. So my argument in general is that you see basically 2 strands of effectively Judaism, right, that are in a kind of Caducean struggle, and sometimes this is actually a kind of very real struggle, but very frequently it is actually Christianity has actually provided safe harbor for Jews for very long periods of time in Europe. And, and from a kind of like moral perspective, a kind of general human moral perspective, I don't want any harm to befall Jews, obviously. But the truth of the matter is that Jews have lived for long periods of time, especially in Western Europe, successfully among Christians, right? And they have been very successful among Christians. One of the reasons for this is because in Christianity, the finance, for example, was delegated to Jews, right? So they actually had a pretty sweet gig, as it were, right?
Actually, for the first 1,000 years of Christianity, usury was illegal. So it's actually the Roman Catholic Church and the papacy around the Renaissance period that began to allow usury.
All right, so you're saying
I'm not Roman Catholic.
Orthodoxy. Yeah, so you're saying Orthodoxy had a better policy in this way, right?
Absolutely.
Well, so, yeah, but I don't. I think in general that the church has not been very antagonistic to Jews, and I don't think that they should be antagonistic to Jews, but they basically allowed them to kind of hang around, as it were, and be exploitive of Gentiles. And
the traditional approach is to, we can not harm other people, whether they agree with us or not, pagan or Jew. And we have to establish certain kinds of means of allowing people. You can't just have like a perfectly racial society. I don't think those things work. It's not possible. Even the historic examples that we have, the most successful empire in the history of the world, the Byzantine Empire. I mean, it wasn't something built on some Teutonic race mythology. It was built on both. Again, many nations within one imperium. And I think that's why that's the Orthodox model. That's why after the fall of Byzantium, Russia attempted to kind of pick up that mantle and be the existing temporal version of the imperium, which, again, that eventually fell. So, and both Byzantium and Russia fell due to similar types of corruption. There was a lot of usury in Byzantium. They had started crumbling to this. So I don't deny that those are definitely factors in the fall of different empires. But I think as Kerry Bolton has argued forcefully in his essay, A Rightist Critique of Racial Determinism, I just don't think the racial determinist arguments hold up, even from a person on the right like Bolton.
All right, let me read through these and we'll take some callers. Shin Chan 256B says, this reminds me of the good old times. Let's get Nick the Knife and someone else and have a team IBS. Well, this was just agreed to be these two. I did see Nick lurking around the chat earlier. We'll see what happens. Probably just going to be these two, though. Politically Coherent says, what do Israeli people have control of in society? We can come back to that if you want. Let's see. Rando says, did the apostles plan on getting martyred? Nicholas Diorio says, what the cinnamon-toast fuck is this guy saying? Andrew M4M Drew says, have these guys read On the Jews and Their Lies by Martin Luther? He wasn't much a fan of the small hats. I guess I could put that to you, Mark. Have you read that book, and what would you say to that point?
Yeah, look, I don't deny that anti-Semitism has existed in the church. I mean, that doesn't go against my point. I mean, you could argue that the Gospels were anti-Semitic, right? So it doesn't go against my point. But the other thing, too, is that Lutheranism was a kind of heresy in the church. How did that play out in real terms? I mean, there's also people like to quote the idea that in Europe, or just, and actually I'm not familiar as to exactly when they date this back to, but there's this kind of famous number floating around the alt-right that Jews have been expelled from 109 countries. To me, to me that is a sign of failure. That's not a sign of kind of success. That's, we shouldn't be expelling Jews every 50 years. That's a system that is broken, right? So we should find a system that is actually, allows us basically to kind of pursue our future in a kind of successful way. And I actually don't even, I ultimately think that, one of the reasons the cults in Rome developed in the manner in which they did, where effectively you see chieftain Aryan gods and you see these are kind of subordinate Semitic gods, is that because Jews effectively operate in a cryptic manner, or they operate in crypsis. So they were able to kind of basically disguise themselves as whites, and yet operate on the behalf of Jews, right? This is kind of very common and well-known phenomena. And I argue that this is also a kind of very ancient phenomena, that a lot of their sort of myths are actually kind of referring to sort of the invisibility, as it were, of crypsis. And so these sort of lesser Semitic chthonic gods were in some cases accorded a role, and so it ends up being a kind of inherently imperfect thing. I mean, I think religion is a sort of kind of necessary evil, as it were, and that it develops basically to kind of safeguard and protect in an ideal way, in ideal circumstances, which, for periods they were approaching in Rome. I mean, obviously Rome was an imperfect thing, but they were seeking effectively to kind of safeguard their race and to ameliorate their race, under an Aryan chieftain god that was moralizing to their people, that represented also a fertility god, of course, but that there were also these kind of secondary gods that were effectively Semitic gods, like the god like Hermes or Mercury, and maybe they tried to Aryanize those cults. That kind of information is lost to history, as it were. But so my theory is that because of the problem of Jewish crypsis, a kind of a polytheism, as it were. I dislike the term polytheism, but a kind of polytheism, as it were, where you have other figures in a cult. I mean, like you would have angels, for example, in Christianity, that represent these sort of different groups that could actually serve a kind of salubrious role, as opposed to serve an antagonistic role. Like Mercury becomes the herald of Jupiter, for example, right? And I think actually Jews effectively attempted to invert these relationships in Christianity with figures like Michael, who is in my mind, I don't know if Jay agrees or not, but is effectively an Aryan figure serving effectively a Jewish god in the figure of Yahweh. But so that's the kind of the long and short of it.
All right, Jay, do you have a response to any of that? And then I'm going to take some callers.
No, I would just say if you look at Luke 21, and then you read Romans 11, our position would be that there is a continued existence of the Jewish people. They do have a significance and relationship to the Jews of the Old Testament period. We would not say that they're completely done away or that they disappeared. I'm familiar with sort of the intricacies of the different Jewish theories and how it's both ethnic and religious. I'm aware of all that, but I'm just giving the Orthodox position, was that we actually believe that they do continue to exist as a people, and that they will be converted at a certain future time. So that's part of the reason why Orthodoxy and Christianity historically has sort of had a live and let live type of attitude, is because we believe that Luke 21 and Romans 11 by St. Paul predict that there will be a future conversion of the Jews, and most of the church fathers held that very, very clearly too.
All right, let me bring in some callers. I think Pepto-Bismol was the first one. Let's try them. Pepto-Bismol, you're on the kill stream. Go ahead.
Okay, so Mark kept boasting repeatedly about him being the first person to decode this, to figure this all out. Right, Mark? That was you?
Get to your point, dude.
Yeah, so I'm going to say a couple of names. You tell me if you've heard any of those before. Acharya S?
So if you're going to
answer the question, have you heard?
I haven't heard of them. So you may list the names of people that I'm not familiar with. And so,
Gerald Massey.
So and I'm not familiar with his work. So he may have come up to
really.
He may have.
I didn't ask if you're familiar with their work. I asked if you know their names. Do they sound familiar to you in any capacity? Acharya S. and Gerald Massey. Do you know those names?
No, I don't.
You don't? So say you've never seen Zeitgeist the movie?
I think I watched like the first 20 minutes.
Really?
But I don't think I agreed with any of the guy's conclusions. So I can't actually think of any innovation that he led me to. I mean, unless you can make some comparisons.
I can't.
Seriously. I mean, I didn't find the guy to be. In fact, I turned it off after 20 minutes. I didn't find the guy to be very insightful at all. So point out some cool innovation or some cool discovery that the guy made. Please do it. I'd be interested.
Fortunately, the first 20 minutes are all that's relevant right now, because that's the topic, that's the section of the film that covered, and like you said, you use these words, dying and rising God, right? You use those words? Are you the ones who, where have you heard that?
I didn't. Look, I'm not saying that I came up with every fucking concept that we're discussing.
No, what you
obviously
said,
not. No, dying and rising.
That's an old this, right? Not that. No, you were the first to decode this myth. Yet you just admitted that you saw the first 20 minutes.
No, you're wrong. You're actually, dude. You're Look, you're not intelligent enough to even recite what I was actually saying. Seriously.
Right? So you didn't. So
what are you claiming that I took from this guy or whatever the case may be? Because honestly, I actually think that the statement that I made, and to my knowledge, I'm not aware, maybe some other people have come to the conclusion, but I think that the statement that you might be focusing on is that these dying and rising gods, I identified, I think that they are basically Semitic cults, right? That they are chthonic Semitic cults. And to my knowledge, that hasn't been pointed out before. Maybe it has. Maybe, and honestly, the truth.
Well, actually, I would agree with you there.
The truth be told, I think that probably other mythographers have probably thought it, but they wouldn't say it because we live in a politically correct culture, right? I mean, there's obviously a lot of people that study myth. So I think that there are probably academics that may have come to similar conclusions as me, but said, fuck it, I'm going to stay away from it because, whatever, right? But I'm not part of the academic world. So I was like, fuck it, this is shit that we need to know and think about.
Trust me, the people I named were not part of the academic world either, but they made literally the exact same claims as you, minus the fact that they were all Jewish conspiracies. So I'm wondering if you really were the first person.
So you think that I'm arguing, which I never argued. You think that I'm arguing that the similarities between Adonis and Bacchus and Dumazet
and Apollo. Don't forget Apollo.
Well, I actually don't think Apollo is very similar to those gods, so I will forget Apollo.
No, because
all right. Well, can I finish my point, dude? I mean, you coming in at seriously. All right. So what I'm saying, I mean, obviously, I'm not the first one to point these things out. So there was already a kind of category that had already been established by, I think it was the Golden Bow. Who was the Golden Bow again? Graves. It had already been established. Fraser. It had already been established. And I think that Fraser or Graves, it may have been Graves, came up with that concept, right? So it had already been established. I had never argued that. I would never make that argument. Obviously not. Now,
that wasn't your argument. Your argument was that, well, the reason that Jesus, what did you say specifically that was debatable whether he was real or not is because this, and this God are very similar. But
I also never said that I'm the first one to make that argument. That's fucking absurd. That's it.
Now you're taking two of my arguments completely out of context. One is completely separate from the other. So you saying that that Jesus he's not real or he's Jewish conspiracy.
One thing, but just point to one specific thing. This is childish. I mean, you're like just spurging out here.
I did.
Point to one thing.
Yeah, like you said, Zeitgeist the movie, you saw the first 20 minutes, which literally espouses all of what you said, minus the fact that it's a Jewish conspiracy. All of you saying...
what exactly that movie expound? I mean, I think it just sort of...
that Christ was a myth, like you said. He was invented by the Jews in this context. He was invented by the Jews in your context.
Look, the Zeitgeist guy...
The point!
That was
what I'm trying to make.
Dude, let me finish my what I'm saying. What the Zeitgeist guy said had been well established well before, right? So,
the reason why I brought up those two names is because those are the people who established it, and both of those people gave no facts when they were challenged on it to give facts to back it up. Every single fact they found were from people post-Christian. Every single one post-Christian.
They didn't establish it. What are you talking about? This has already been established. I mean, the evidence is kind of obvious when you look at the symbols of these other earlier cults. They're the same symbols that basically been incorporated into the Christian cult.
What do you mean by earlier cult?
You mean pre-Christian? You name it, right? So
in before, what is it, 0 AD?
Are you arguing from a Christian perspective? Because it sounds like you might be now. Whereas before,
I'm arguing from a historical perspective. Because you're arguing
what's your argument?
My argument is that you were arguing that Jesus isn't real because he has all these similarities to all these other religions.
There's a number of reasons why he's not
and
real.
Then you admitted that you saw only the first 20 minutes, which is all that matters, of Zeitgeist the movie, which espouses the exact same thing. And I can link it. There's it's like an hour something long of this person debunking every single point. He literally gets the creators to make a whole podcast showing their lists of facts of how this is why these are all proof that Jesus is actually a myth and that these cults inspired it. And then every single point they make ends up being either completely slanderous or post-Christian, as in after Jesus was born. Because a lot of the pagan cults, which I'm sure you know, adapted Christian themes after Jesus, along with the Catholic Church adapting pagan themes after Jesus, correct?
No. So what happens? There are pre-existing cults that are using symbols that have clearly been brought into the Christ cult. I mean, that's right. So your idea, so the Adonis cult.
Yeah, no, that's not clear.
The Adonis cult,
not clear.
Clearly, historically, the Adonis cult clearly preceded the Christian cult, right? Because we actually have relatively hard dates for the Christian cult, right?
But
we actually have a hard kind of origin to but the Adonis cult is like 600 years older, dude. Right?
Except the only similarities you can mention are dated like 300 years after Jesus died that are connections to Christianity.
That's actually false.
No, it's not.
Well, you're not actually. Well, look, dude. You're not bringing up specific points, so I have no way to respond to what the guy's actually talking about.
All right, I let it go a little long because the caller came prepared to fight, so I let him stay a little bit longer. Now,
Ralph, I'm starting to learn how you think, and I'm not. All right.
Well, I mean, I want an entertaining show. Yeah.
All right.
I mean, if that's a controversial thought, then yeah. Go ahead, Jay. I think you wanted to say something, or if you did, go ahead.
It's all like old ground at this point.
I think that what we continue to see throughout the debate is not actual proof or evidence. We see Mark saying over and over and over that it's obvious, that it's clear, and that's what he needs to demonstrate, and he hasn't demonstrated. What he's been is arbitrary. He's done a lot of ad hoc. He's done a lot of prejudicial conjecture, and he has basically surrendered the rules and laws of debate when he admitted he was a relativist. So I don't think he's proved anything.
All right, and yeah, that's my only concern is an entertaining show. I don't have a side in the debate. If that's what you mean, no, I just want people to be entertained watching the show. Yeah. Okay.
Is Nick the Knife out there? Is he looking for a fight? Because honestly,
he was in the chat. Yeah.
I think he's kind of funny, and it's too bad he doesn't get along with Spencer. I think that's unfortunate. But if the guy wants to just like launch insults at me the whole debate, I don't know. I mean, it might be fun. I don't know, or it may not be.
Well, the Discord link is out there. If people want to call in, they certainly can. There's the link. Okay. Let me take another caller. Onion Wizard, you're on the kill stream. Go ahead.
Mark, what is relativism?
All right. Okay. Let's try another caller. Wrath of Bong 420. You're on the kill stream.
Man, you hear me?
Yes. Go ahead. Are you there? Wrath of Bong, please speak, sir. All right.
Hello?
Well, yes, speak. Okay, well, it's not working out for him. I apologize on that. Dr. Hulk, you're on the kill stream. Go ahead. Hulk. Let me try this real quick. Okay, Hulk, are you there? Bruce Banner, please respond. I showed you my dick. All right, he's not responding. All right, let's try somebody else. Let's see. JKHG, you're on the kill stream. Go ahead. And you're muted for some odd reason. Callers are letting me down now. All right, let's try this one. Shadow the Beast, you're on the kill stream. Go ahead.
Holy shit.
Yes, you're on the
Long time, first time caller.
Oh, thank you.
Oh, I love your fucking show, man.
Much
I've been listening
appreciated.
For about a year. Anyway,
you.
Let's get down to the business. I'm just going to start with this. For the Lord your God will bless you, and he has promised, and you will lend to many nations, but you will borrow from none. You will rule over many nations, but none will rule over you. Deuteronomy 15:6. I wonder what that means.
Yeah, I'd be glad to address that. I'm assuming.
Yeah,
that's
sure. Go
ahead.
ahead.
Right. So if you read the New Testament, when Christ comes, those promises are given to the fulfillment of Israel, which is the church. So if you look at the history of the last 2,000 years, where the church has gone, it has conquered. It has ruled over nations. It has told kings to submit to her, and they have for 2,000 years. So that's precisely the fulfillment of that text. Well, the lending in the Old Testament, the lending and borrowing in the Old Testament was a provisional time period. That's why the Mosaic Law was given at a certain time, and then it was fulfilled, and the church thereafter forbade usury. That's why in Acts 15, the church met to decide which aspects of the Old Covenant would continue into the New. That's why they have the Jerusalem Council, which becomes the model for all church synods after that. So yes, the ability to exact usury upon the nations, God allowed that to the nation of Israel so that they could continue to exist until the coming of the Messiah. They had a provisional role, and they fulfilled that role. And then they failed and so that now transferred to the church. So if you read the book of Hebrews, it will tell you about how those Old Testament predictions and laws were fulfilled.
Yeah, but Jews essentially want to be the people who do not work, who want to just spend their time studying the Torah. And they used to use denigratory terms.
That has nothing to do with my position, and I just answered the question.
No, but you said that's totally okay.
I said it was provisional. I said it was provisional until the coming of the Messiah.
Until the Messiah. Well, right. I doubt that. But yeah, there's more.
I don't care whether you doubt it. I mean, that's the position the church has had for 2,000 years.
Yeah. But what I see in the Abrahamic faith is that it's not laws based on principles, but principles based on laws, which come from the book. You look at the book and you find something and they say, okay, then you extract a principle from a law in the book. And then you've got this thing, like, for example, you go on YouTube, you find some video about some news story of a kid which has been raped or something, and you find a comment saying, these adulterers must be punished. Adultery? I don't call that adultery. It's not like your wife is screwing behind your back. It's like murdering and raping a kid is the same thing. This is the problem with all Abrahamic faiths. It's the law that dictates the principle, not the other way around. And that is extremely dangerous. Religion should be a guide, not, that's my point on that. And now the problem of monotheism. Monotheism and the archetypes. For example, Mark was saying that Apollo is a good archetype. He is. And I want to be like Apollo. I don't want to be like Jesus. I don't want to be a hippie kicking figs and telling people to abandon their families.
Yeah, you're just replying to evangelical nonsense. I'm here. I represent Orthodoxy, dude. We have warrior saints. We have king saints. Okay, so you're replying to a straw man.
Every saint bases his actions on Jesus.
You don't know what Orthodox Christianity teaches, dude. You're way off.
No, I'm not familiar with Orthodoxy. I'm familiar with
obviously right. So that's what I'm here to debate. So you're talking about like evangelical, Joel Osteen crap. But so you're not debating me.
I think he's saying that Christ is the central venerated figure in the faith, and he's a different model than Apollo. I mean, just to kind of clarify,
but the Jesuses are different in these different churches. We're not evangelicals. We're not Joel Osteen. We have warrior saints and king saints. I just said that.
You have the same testament. You have the same New Testament.
Yeah, the gospel in Christ, the figure is
that has nothing to do with our position. I could just say that there's a million different pagan sects. You all have the same pagan gods. I'm not making that argument. That's a fallacy. That's a genetic.
You still have a God that says turn the other cheek, for example, right?
Yeah.
Or render unto Caesar what is Caesar.
So hold on. So the way that we do
that has another interpretation, though.
No, you don't. The way that you have to.
I'm not going to pile on. Let
Jay respond. Go ahead, Jay.
Right. So the way that this has been explained is that typically in the history of the church is that you can't take personal vengeance. Okay, so if you go back to Leviticus 17, even in Leviticus in the law, you weren't allowed to take personal vengeance. You have to love your neighbor, right? So there was a court system that was set up where you could appeal in the courts if you had an issue with somebody. It means that you can't take personal vengeance. So Jesus is actually rebuking the Pharisees who had twisted the law and said that you could, in certain cases, exact personal vengeance. Jesus is still saying that you can't, and it's still harmonized with the rest of the New Testament because you can exercise personal defense, and the civil state should enforce the moral law. That's why Romans 13, Paul's very clear. Jesus is perfectly synonymous with this as well. You have to, the civil ruler should enforce the moral law. That's why Paul says he has the power of the sword in Romans 13. So that's why in the history of Orthodoxy, we have the Symphonia. Both Sobernost and Symphonia are developed out of these teachings. That's why the double-headed eagle of Byzantium, that's always symbolized church and state working in harmony. That's how you build a culture. You can't build a culture and a civilization, an imperium, based on conspiracy theories about ancient gods and concocting your own religious rites and ceremonies. That's just a scam.
Well, no, that's our history that was taken away from us by the Christians. a religion has to have continuity of the race.
You
of the
don't have
tribe.
access to that continuity.
Of course, it was wiped out by the Christians, so we have to rebuild it from the ground up. Have to start. At least we have. You guys have the book. At least
you're going to create a cult. Yeah.
Well, look, Christianity.
No, I'm not creating a cult.
Christianity is a cult.
No, it's not.
Of course, Christianity fits the definition.
All religions have cultic worship.
Yeah, Judaism is a cult as well. So, I mean, to say something is a cult,
yeah, but it's not a cult.
Is not discredited.
Sense. It's not a cult. You're talking about creating a cult.
Yeah, well, look, I call it the cult of Apollo because it is a cult. Yeah. Right. Now,
exactly.
The advantage of it, though, is it doesn't require these sort of kind of mystical beliefs and things which are unprovable. Effectively,
actually, it does.
They're kind of elite.
We're supposed to believe you, who believes in relativism, and you're going to concoct a cult. That's crazy.
Well, first of all, I'm not concocting a cult. I'm predicting what will form as a cult.
Okay.
As a response.
You're a relativist, and we're supposed to believe in you and things that don't exist, right? So things don't exist. You don't believe that morals exist. Objective morals don't exist. That's what relativism means, by the way.
Well, look, I believe in degeneracy, and I believe in non-degeneracy.
Yeah, and I asked you how you knew the difference.
Non-degeneracy. Well, because it's actually obvious to most people, the difference between it. Most people
it's not obvious. That's what you do.
No. I mean, the truth is actually most people know that to kill your neighbor is actually not.
That's an appeal to the that's a fallacy. Most people know.
Life is not a good thing. Most people.
You know what fallacies are? Do you know what a bait?
Look, and that was actually one of
most people know.
That was one of Nietzsche's. That was one of Nietzsche's arguments against.
Did you know what a fallacy is?
That was one of Nietzsche's arguments against Christianity.
That's an appeal to authority. Appeal to authority.
Well, dude, you've been appealing to authority the whole time. You've been appealing to the false authority of the Hebrew Bible and Christianity, which are invented myths by Jews.
Yeah, it's not.
So you've been appealing to that authority.
It's not inconsistent in my paradigm to appeal to an authority.
Your whole gig is an appeal to
it's not
inconsistent. What are you even talking about?
It's not inconsistent in my paradigm to appeal to an ultimate authority.
Well, it's not inconsistent in my paradigm to appeal to authority. I already cited the guy.
And your ultimate authority. Your ultimate authority.
I already cited the guy as a major influence on me. Can I appeal to him or no?
You're a relativist, so there are no ultimate authorities. That's why your position contradicts. I'm not a relativist.
Nietzsche. So now I forgot where I was because of all this kind of.
Yeah, because you're so wrapped up in like 15 different fallacies all at once.
Come on, dude. So yeah,
you could. You know what you could do? You could Google right now the basic fallacies. There'll be about 15 of them. You could look through there and find the ones that you're making very easily. So appeal to consensus. Do you know that that's a fallacy?
You actually, this is your way. This is your way of actually not responding.
Yes, that's how the debate works. You call people out on fallacy.
No, you don't respond.
You go to a university.
You don't respond.
You go to a university. You take a class. You do a debate. You do a debate. You call people out on fallacy.
You avoid actually engaging in the argument. That's how you
call people out on a fallacy.
That's how you protect Christianity, by this kind of bullshit and not even really engaging in an argument.
I called you out on multiple fallacies. That's the argument. That's how you win a debate. If you take a basic debate class in college, that's what you'll do.
You know, you call a religion. And Apollo, what I describe.
That's a fallacy.
It's a much more sober construction, right? I'm making a very simple equation between
you can't construct anything as a relativist. There's no constructions because everything is a social construct as a relativist.
All right, whatever you said. Brian.
Appeal to consensus is a fallacy. It's a basic fallacy.
Hey, the chats. I mean, this is getting inane, dude. This is
it's inane when you just constantly. That's why we have laws of logic. That's why we have laws of debate. Because you can't just do that, and that's how you win a debate. And if you take
Ralph, can you take the next?
Yeah, I was going to ask. We're going a little bit long. Do you mind if we go 10 or 15 minutes so we can get the rest of these callers? It's up to you guys.
Let's do super chats.
Okay. I could read a couple super chats. Let's see. Pro Truth Anti Media says he's mixing Schofield heresy with trad theology. Tara Jester says QAnon is more coherent than Mark. Godzilla 37 says Blood Sports returns. Psycho Dad says I call dibs on being our new god. Invisible Duck 77 says does the cult of Apollo let women vote? I guess you maybe is that directed towards.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, women would not vote.
Mark is
in a kind of ideal society, women would
consensus a fallacy.
So, hey, can you continue with the super chats?
So you can't.
This guy actually doesn't want to discuss the topic. He doesn't want to discuss the topic. He can't.
Is appeal to consensus a fallacy?
Because the topic is so easily fucking blown out of the water and destroyed. Anyways, return to
is appeal to consensus a fallacy, Mark?
Did Jesus
So he
walk
won't
on,
answer.
did Jesus
So
walk
that's
on
why he
water?
lost again.
Jay, did Jesus walk on water? Did Jesus turn water into wine?
Yes.
Oh, okay, great.
Is
I,
appeal
I,
to,
look,
is
I
appeal
don't
to
know how
consensus
you can
fallacy.
consider yourself logical with these insane.
Is appeal to
mystical-
consensus a fallacy?
Let's go to super chats.
Is appeal to consensus a fallacy?
Okay, let me.
Yeah, he can't answer it. That's why, because he's completely crushed.
You look. I came here to discuss. You haven't discussed the topic because you can't.
I called you out for appeal to
You've
consensus.
been blown the fuck out, dude. Seriously, you can't discuss.
I called
the
you
topic.
out for appeal to consensus.
Your whole basis is on some mystical, magical Jewish mythology, effectively.
Yeah, that's ad hominem.
Right?
That's ad hominem.
It's
appeal to emotion.
Yeah.
Appeal to emotion is a fallacy.
You haven't made ad hominem attacks? All right, let's keep going with
appeal to emotion and appeal to consensus are fallacies, Mark. Did you know that?
Dude, I wish you could hear yourself.
That's why.
I wish you could hear yourself. You sound
you
like
should see. Yeah, you should
you
see.
sound like a fucking joke, man. You haven't debated. You haven't addressed this topic at all, dude.
The way debate works is that you look at
chat.
fallacies in the argumentation. That's what a debate is. That's if you took a basic logic class in college, or if you had debate in college, this is what you'd be doing, Mark. You would be learning where the fallacies are.
I see some people in chat asking for a poll on who's winning. I guess we could do a little informal poll here in the chat. Press 1 if you think Mark is winning, and press 2 if you think Jay is winning. Tara Jester says, Ralph, in the pain, Mark's cult is eternally BTFO'd. Raging Canadian is eager for a Flamenco stream. Also, I'm trying to look at the chat. Let's see. We'll see how. There's some ones in there, but it does appear that the twos are ahead pretty solidly. Let's read it. There are some super chats over on Stream Elements as well. Deep Fried Lettuce says both these guys are weird ass nerds. Debate that. Nathan says, how do you hold that Christianity is a Jewish subversion when Christianity has been arguably the main basis for European antagonism against Jews? For example, the Jewish expulsion from Spain and Luther's works against the Jews. Now, I kind of asked that myself earlier, and we talked about it. But if you want to follow,
yeah, I already responded to the question.
Okay.
I already,
we did get to that. Soylent Goy with a nice donation, but it's just all slurs that I can't read over the air, so I won't read those. But thank you very much. Jigaboo Jones says, not on topic here, but does background play on an iPhone work for anyone here? I don't know if that does. It works on my Android. At least. Deep Fried Lettuce says, nerds and their big words like bruh. The average Ralph male doesn't even read like haha, where do you think you are? He used a word there that I won't use as well. Tank92 says, Dyer blew out Mark's light, collars keeping it dark. Good thing Spencer glows in the dark. I think that might have actually rhymed as well. Okay, let's take another caller. Like I said, it'll probably take about 10 or 15 to finish up with the callers if you guys are good with that. Let's try Rathabong really quickly. This would be considered a lightning round.
Terribly sorry about the earlier audio issue. I just want to say, really good debate, guys. Jay, you are based. I am Serbian Orthodox, so it's nice to hear somebody from the Orthodoxy coming on. Mark, you are really gay, and it's hard to listen to you talk because you hate Jews, but you argue like one using pulpil. And I'd like to read one verse from the Bible, if you don't mind. I know your afflictions and your poverty, yet you are rich. I know the slander of those who say they are Jews and are not, but are a synagogue of Satan. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Rathbong. Appreciate that. Let's continue. Let's try Dr. Hulk again. Dr. Hulk, you're on the kill stream. Can you hear this? All right, Hulk, you're kicked out of the Avengers. No more attempts for you. I'll try the other one again though. JKHG, you're on the kill stream. You're gonna have to join Hulk, sir. Stormer the Stormer, you're muted though, so please unmute yourself. You don't need to mute yourself when you go in the green room. It automatically does that, and then when I pull you in, it unmutes. Now, yes, I can hear you. Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I don't have a mic on me, so I'm going to sound terrible, but basically, Mark, do you understand the difference between traditional theology and the Schofield evangelical crap that came about in the 1830s?
Yeah, my analysis is just based on the Bible itself, right? So That's what I would say. So I'm responding actually to a scripture or biblical text, whether it's the New Testament or the Old Testament.
Well, I mean, Jesus himself says that they are the seeds of the devil, and that they're not really like. And when you draw, like, Jay was talking about how, like, from Old Testament Judaism to Christianity, you have like a straight line. And what Jesus is talking about, and what modern Judaism basically is to branch off from the Pharisaic code that goes up into the Talmud and Talmudism, and eventually Kabbalah, which is where you get all the weird mystic stuff. And like, so this thing about modern Judaism and Christianity being in cahoots, you see it a lot with the evangelical crowd, but it's not traditional theology, and it's not what the church meant the theology to be.
All right, thank you, caller. Do you have a response to that, Mark?
Yeah, no, I mean, basically I would say that, in Christianity, you have both a Jewish devil and a Jewish God, right? You have Yahweh and you have the figure of Satan. There are other demons too that could fall into different categories. But so again, I think it's essentially a Caducean relationship where you're basically between two Jewish poles as a Christian, right? You're venerating a Jewish God, and you're also ostensibly railing against Jewish opposition. But as I've said, I think that the church has generally been very gentle toward Jews. And again, I'm not someone who's interested in conflict between Christians and Jews. I think that's in some ways it's kind of a worst case scenario, because it's kind of a sort of it's a kind of cyclical relationship that Jews and Christians end up having, where Jews are expelled, for example, from a country, and then sort of the same problems occur. It's a kind of a cyclical process, of course. Whereas I think that a religion could be developed that would deal with this, and I think that they effectively were attempting this in Rome, where they were developing immortal gods, like Jupiter, for example, or Mars or Apollo in Greece. And, it ultimately fell to these sort of chthonic cults, one of which was Christianity, probably the most potent of which was Christianity. And but what they were attempting was to make their gods immortal as kind of archetypes of the race. So the race also becomes immortal in a kind of collective fashion, as opposed to these other kind of chthonic cults, which are ultimately personal salvation cults, where everyone's kind of out for themselves. They're trying to save their own soul, as it were. Anyways, so that's kind of my response to that.
All right, Jay, did you have anything to add? Jay, you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Did
not really. I would just say that it looks to me like there is a kind of an ignorance when it comes to the history of Christianity, especially Byzantium and this kind of stuff. That's why I continue to refer back to it. And again, I really, I think Mark thinks that I'm trying to just be mean or rude to him, but the point of debate is that you follow laws and rules, and that's how a debate goes. That's the whole point of it.
All right. So we have a few more callers. I'll let Flamenco be the last caller. I see him in there, so if he can hear my voice, I'll just let him know that. Chromatron, you're on the kill stream, but you're muted. Where have I seen this story before? Chromatron, unmute yourself. His avatar just switched to Jarbo, by the way. Sir, you're muted. No. Oh. All right, well. Tulabist or Tulabist, you're on the kill stream. Go ahead.
Yeah, so
you're real low, by the way, so just go ahead real quick. Yeah.
I have to just tell here that you can actually recolor the white. That's why white.
I can't really hear you. You said something about the white race. Kind of repeat that a little bit.
No, white wool.
Oh, okay. White wool, that you can recolor white wool, is that what you said?
Yeah, that's what. So, fuck.
All right, I'm gonna have to take you out because we can't really hear you, and I'm coming up against the end of the show. But please call back in sometime. Ubu's Vulture on the kill stream. Go ahead.
Hey, how's it going? I just wanted to bring up the fact that he seems to be arguing in a weird way, like he doesn't understand the fact that the devil and Jacob, for example, have a lot in common. The heroes venerate Jacob as some sort of like Jewish hero and founding father of Judaism, but Christians read about the things that Jacob did and we're like, wow, Jacob was kind of a really shitty person. He's the one who formed all the, tribes of Israel. So when you look at that and you see the way that he engages in seductive language and behavior to get the heritage of his father through illegitimate means, that's the kind of behavior that we talk about the devil himself sort of engaging in. So you guys have a comment on that, or?
Yeah, I would say that it's our view that the patriarchs are sinners like we are. This is an area where we disagree, for example, with Islam. Islam believes that many of the patriarchs are basically sinless. So that's a huge difference in religious view, whereas we don't believe anybody is sinless, and that would include Jacob or Abraham or anybody. So Jacob is a wily guy. There's no doubt about it. And when he wrestles with the Logos in the famous meeting, where Jesus basically renamed, we believe that that's Jesus that he's wrestling with, the pre-incarnate Logos. Jesus calls him Israel, right? That's where he gets that name. So there's definitely a connection between who he is as a person, his name, the symbolism, and we definitely believe that that's also historical. So I wouldn't in any way deny what you said, and I would say that the names are significant, but I just don't think that it has any bearing on whether we need to discard the historicity. So for us, yes, he's a sinful guy, as are all the Old Testament patriarchs. Some of them did really awful things, but that's part of the reason why we believe in grace.
Did you want to say a little something, Mark?
No, I don't. I mean, it's to me, it seems a little bit arbitrary. But yeah, so I guess I don't have a ton to add. Okay. As far as he did bring up something. No, I'm good.
Okay. Hulk, I went against my own claim and I brought you back in, so I hope you have something good.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so since Mark seems to believe everything's a Jewish conspiracy, I just wanted to ask, was the Holocaust a Jewish conspiracy? Or any of the other genocides against Jews? Were those conspiracies?
All right, thank you.
I'm actually not a Holocaust scholar. It's not something I've studied very closely. I've seen some things that seem to indicate it might have been exaggerated, but I don't have a strong opinion on it. So.
All right. Yeah, it's a little bit outside of the scope of this of this conversation. Slightly, I would say. But Eric DeMamp, you're on the kill stream. Go ahead.
Hey, Ralph. Thanks for having me on. I just want to say that Mark is a terrible debater. He very clearly lost this debate. He's gotten very angry and belligerent, and you need to go and suck more Richard Spencer dick. Thank you.
That was a little rude. Let's take. Did you want to respond to that, Mark?
No, I don't. I obviously don't want to respond to that.
Okay. Flamenco, sometimes co-host here in the kill stream. You're the last caller, sir.
Oh, I just got to first give the forenote that I will be incredibly biased as I am a member of Christian Gang. I just wanted to ask Mark. You did. I caught like the very tail end of this. You said that you accept that there is like degeneracy and things like that, right?
Accept that there is degeneracy as a phenomenon in the world, of course.
Yes.
Right, is that your question? Sure.
Well, no. I was going to ask, would you at least admit that Christianity is a pretty strong deterrent in terms of socialization and also just like a set of traditions that discourage degeneracy, at least?
Well, here's the thing. I mean, I think that Christianity, I think in some cases that can be true. So I'll acknowledge that it can in some cases discourage degeneracy. The problem, though, ultimately is that it's not interested, sort of, in my opinion, it doesn't seem interested at all really in power in the kind of cosmos, as it were, or in the here and now in a kind of effective way. in the sense that it becomes kind of impotent as a world or temporal power versus Jews, for example, right? Who are kind of very dominant ethnic group right now, and they kind of they preside over highly degenerate and destructive culture, which the church is very weak against, right? In comparison, is weak. I mean, the church I think that orthodoxy within the church might be growing, but the church itself and Christianity in general is obviously in a kind of steep decline. So it doesn't really have a kind of effective answer, as it were, to a kind of a bacchanal or degenerate culture that sort of pervades more generally, right? So ultimately, it will kind of lose a battle to Judaism, as it were. That's my response.
So
but,
your main gripe with Christianity specifically is that adherents to it generally are less focused on worldly matters, or at least some worldly matters, by and large.
Well, they can't write so. In other words, and I think that Christian commenters, in many cases would concede this as well, is that in a lot of cases Christianity, in kind of in effective or functional terms, is basically a kind of cultural tofu, in the sense that it just kind of takes on, and I'm sure this is less true in some sects, like Orthodoxy, for example, but I think also the milieu of Orthodoxy, or sort of the dominant milieu of Orthodoxy in Russia and Greece, is unique as well. So there are other factors involved, but there also could be aspects of that faith that are different and prevent this sort of thing, more or less. But I think that commonly the church functions as a kind of tofu, where it's not really, temporal powers are ultimately in control, and it's ultimately not kind of interested in temporal power, understandably, because the goal of Christians is eternal life in the afterworld. And and so that's what I would say. I mean, ultimately it's a personal salvation cult, and it doesn't present a formidable opponent or kind of curb or resistance against degenerate forces in the world. That's what I would argue.
See, I would just disagree with you on that. Another core tenet of Christianity is to evangelize, essentially, to minister to friends and your neighborhood and like the world, essentially. So there is a aspect of it that is also dealing with the world in it. Okay,
I understand that. I think despite that,
all right,
all right. Thank you, D'Amico. I know you'll be doing a stream later. I'll host that here on the channel. So thanks for calling in. Thank you, man.
Yep.
All right. We've reached the end of the road here. Now I'll give. Now who did I start out with? I think was it you, Jay, that started out?
Yeah.
Okay.
More or less.
So,
well, yeah, kind of.
Okay, so I'll give you the first summation here at the end of the show, and I'll let Mark close it out. So go ahead and give your thoughts if you have any final takes or something you want to point people out to. Also, you can remind them about your websites and stuff too.
Yeah. So, I think that the way any debate works is that you have to compare the two systems, and you have to follow the established rules and laws. I believe those rules and laws are objective. They're not arbitrary when it comes to the laws of logic and the fallacy. So it's actually the purpose of debate is to try to point those out and find those. And that's, in the history of all debate, how you determine who won a debate or who lost a debate. So that's why those logical laws matter. They're not just constructs. They're not just tricks. They're not word games that you play. They're very important in how we do debate. I don't believe that the laws of logic are out of accord or contradictory with belief in the supernatural, and that's why I do apologetics. So there's a lot of debates I have at my channel. People want to go to Jay Dyer on YouTube. You can subscribe there, and then my website is jaysanalysis.com, and my books are Esoteric Hollywood 1 and 2. My TV show is Hollywood Decoded.
All right, Mark, go ahead.
Yeah, I think that the frustrating part of this debate is, I think that it was a sort of inherently difficult debate, just because our worldviews are so divergent, and we don't share many premises, and I'm not sure that we share many goals either. So, it becomes kind of a less fruitful debate, as it were. And from my perspective, I actually a little irritated myself for getting so hot under the collar, and I hope that Jay doesn't take offense to anything that I said today, because I actually, I actually kind of like Jay. I think he's a cool guy, and but I know we get a little hot under the collar, and I know that religion is can be, and I don't think that Jay necessarily treats it in this way, but can be kind of a touchy subject, as it were, yep. Right? So those were reasons that I was kind of had a little concern about even doing this debate, because I don't want to be kind of in the position of basically insulting Jay and his worldview. I dread actually being in that position. On the other hand, I do think that my ideas are important. I think that the conversation that I'm having with my work is very important. And I do really believe the things that I'm saying. In other words, I do think that Christianity ultimately is hostile to the white race, and that it isn't kind of the way forward, and that we have to kind of be venerating our own gods, as it were. But that, as far as, one thing that I thought was frustrating about the debate is that I think that Jay was sometimes avoiding the subject matter, which is fine. I kind of knew that this would be a kind of problematic debate for the reasons I've already outlined. But I was grateful to, Jay was interested in the debate, because I think people on his channel were telling him that that I was discussing the Hebrew Bible, I think, and that they wanted him to come in and discuss it with me. Yeah. And so, obviously, I'm grateful that Jay invited me for the debate, and Ralph, I'm grateful to be on the show.
Thank you.
But yeah, I mean, they're difficult. I just, again, and I don't, for the reasons from Jay's perspective, the reasons that he may not want to debate me again is because of the reasons he outlined, and from my perspective, the reasons that I outlined. But I think it's going to be difficult for me to debate Christians in general for some of the same reasons that we encountered tonight. Right. Which is kind of just I just end up having my own audience, and they end up having their own audience, and and they never meet, which is, or who knows, or sometimes they go into Jay's comment section or whatever. So
did you want to follow up on a little bit?
Yeah, I'm not going to start another debate, but I would just say that my response to the question with Jacob and Laban is that I accept the story as an actual historical event. I don't see it as a parable. So that's the first thing that I think I did address, and then I would say that I think it's just pretty self-evident, if you want to use that term, that the laws of logic are required in a debate, and you can't compromise on those. You have to hold to those. Any debater, that's kind of assumed at the outset.
Yeah, and I think that from my perspective, I argued in a logical manner, and I was making logical, sound points. So that's my perspective.
But I mean, there are a lot of the places where you did commit fallacies. I wasn't trying to be mean to you. I'm calling out. That's what a debate does. So you can attribute ill motives, but that's literally how I see a debate.
No, I didn't consider you being mean to me. I was just kind of frustrated with that tactic, whereas I was more interested in talking about the topic, or the subject matter, effectively. Mm-hmm. So I felt like it delayed actually talking about the subject matter, which again, I was kind of dreading having the conversation for all the reasons that I've already outlined. I'm not interested in being insulting to you. I'm not interested in, if there are believing Christians out there, I'm not interested in like unnerving their faith, or whatever the case is.
I don't have any ill motives or anything, and I think it made for I always enjoy a heated debate, so I think it made for a great show. What do you think, Ralph? Was that?
I do too. I think it made for a great show, and I enjoyed it, and I think many people in the chat enjoyed it as well, and hopefully both you guys can come back. Maybe we'll try to set up some other stuff with one or the other. I would enjoy that, and I appreciate it, gentlemen. You have a good one.
Yeah, of course.
Thank you, Ralph.
See you guys.
Thank you, Mark.